Everyone. I'm Councilmember Zach Hall, and I'd like to call the July 13th City Council study session to order. A couple housekeeping items to go through first. Due to the Governor's Proclamation 20-28 relating to the COVID-19 emergency and open public meetings, this meeting will be held entirely remotely. There will be multiple public comment opportunities at tonight's meeting. There will be a general public comment opportunity at the beginning of the meeting, or you can make your comments after the presentation and council question and answer period after each agenda item. Council President Hunt will also share a summary of any comments that have been emailed regarding tonight's agenda items. So I will now take a roll call of the council members in attendance, and just a quick note that council members Ray and Goodman have excused absences this evening. So please stay here when I call your name. Councilmember DeMichelle.
Here.
Thank you. Council President Hunt.
Here.
Councilmember Martz.
Here.
And Councilmember Walsh.
Here.
Great, and I'm here. So that's everyone except the excused members. The first item on the agenda this evening is public comment. If there was anyone on the call now who would like to make public comments at this time but did not sign up to speak, please raise your virtual hand. And there are a couple ways to do that. If you're on the phone, you can press *3. Or if you've joined by computer on your smartphone, look for the hand icon. This varies by device. One option may be to go to the participant panel and choose the raise hand icon in the lower right-hand corner. I will wait a moment to see if anyone wishes to raise their hand and speak tonight. And clerk, have you seen anyone sign up to speak this evening or indicated a desire to speak?
Yes.
All right, perfect. Just a few more comments then on the public comment. Citizen comments are an important part of the public process. We take them very seriously and factor them into the decisions that we make. Please direct your comments to the whole council and not individuals. And while this is not a question and answer session, we will contact you to follow up if needed. A few more things. When recognized, unmute your microphone, state your name, your address, and your relationship to the city. Speak clearly and pause frequently. Please limit your comments to 5 minutes and then remute your microphone when you're finished. If you do not respond after your name or phone number is called out, or if your connection is lost unexpectedly, we'll need to proceed in the meeting. But you are encouraged to rejoin if able. And then a final note, personal attacks, obscene language, derogatory remarks, and disruptive behavior will not be permitted. City Clerk, can you please identify the first person who signed up to speak tonight?
Yes, the first person signed up is Susan Leonelli. Susan, in just a moment, you'll have the option to turn your video on and also unmute. You have the floor.
Thank you. Actually, I would prefer to defer my comment until after the presentation of the first item, if that's acceptable.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
The next person signed up to speak is Cindy Gross. Cindy, in just a moment, you should have the option to turn your video on and unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, excellent. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. And I want to talk about the equity board that is on the agenda for tonight and the fact that there's a huge upside in economic terms from having highly diverse teams, highly diverse projects, highly diverse groups of people across the board. And it is proven again and again, for example, racially diverse organizations outperform by over 30% the least racially diverse organizations. Gender diverse teams with a lot of women tend to outperform by 17 to 20% the least gender diverse teams. And so when we look at the Equity Council, it's not just that it's the right thing to do. It's also that there is an impact to the city, there's an impact to our culture and our communities by having the equity board. And it also helps to break teams out of groupthink and out of monocultures, which is part of the way that it does create that economic advantage. And that's what I have to say tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. The next person signed up to speak is James Whitfield. James, in just a moment, you have the option to turn your video on and unmute.
Great, thank you. Thank you, council members and commissioners and staff for the opportunity to speak. I am James Whitfield. I am a member of the Right to Breathe Committee. We coordinate voices across the East Side, Black voices across the East Side, to ensure safety and respect for Black people. The way we do that is to focus on eliminating anti-Black systemic racism, to abolish that, to work to ensure equitable oversight and advisory processes, to ensure that nothing happens about us without us, and to ensure that de-escalation occurs relative to the ways that rules and laws are enforced on Black people. We're looking forward to hearing both presentations this evening, both about the proposed equity board as well as the equity framework, because we are optimistic that the council will move in ways that will in fact ensure safety and respect for Black people, including moving forward on the policy items that we have presented to the mayor. And I am sure that you can have access to those directly from her or from us if you would like to do so. Again, we're looking forward to hearing your conversation and want to make sure that you know that we are available to assist you in any way we can to ensure safety and respect for Black people. Thank you so much.
The next person who signed up to speak is Paul Lawali. Paul, in just a moment, you'll have the option to turn your video on and unmute. You have the floor.
Aisha, this is Monica. I apologize for intervening. I just got a note from Paul stating that he has some tech trouble and he's rebooting. I'm wondering if it may be okay to come back in a couple of minutes. Or
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. We'll move to the next speaker. Thanks for letting us know, Monica. Okay, the next person who's indicated a desire to speak is Susan Neville. Susan, in just a moment, you'll have the option to turn on your video and unmute. Susan, you have the floor.
Hi, I'm here. So sorry. Hello, everybody. It's really good to see everyone. It's been quite a while. I'm going to put my video on too. Here we go. I think I can do this. Sorry. Well, there I am. Hi. I wanted to commend, well, first of all, I'm Susan Neville. I'm a longtime resident. And am I gone now?
You're back, Susan. Go ahead.
Okay. Woo! Can you tell it's been a while? I want to commend the Human Service Committee and staff, first of all. The amount of work and hard time and thought that has gone into this project far exceeds anything I've seen in a long time. And I also want to know that I'm in total agreement with the fact Issaquah needs to find a solution to our equity, diversity, and inclusion. What I'm about to say may contradict that, but creating another board may not be the best way to accomplish this large of a task. Equity affects all parts of the administration, our public services, our community, and more. And I agree totally with the community focus group and forum summations that focused on the following, which is in the packet. Number one is to foster and develop relationships with service delivery departments, including all the park and community services and police, transportation, the planning and development, and to advise these departments on equity policies and best practices. Another one was to develop relationships with the Issaquah community, that is so important. Initiate, support, and cultivate the conversations on matters that impact communities of color and create robust opportunities for community input, collaboration, seek opportunities to use the feedback to inform decision makers. This is just so clear from what the community has been asking for quite a while. Providing feedback with the equity lens on city policies and plans and regulations and codes that already exist. These are just a few that the Human Services Committee brought to the plate. My major concern is, can a board with 9 members, diverse, may not be enough to recognize, recommend, and create long-term change that needs to happen. And I'm also concerned we have not explored all other options or anything before making this final decision, because we are about to invest a lot of capital and resources in the formation of a committee that is not easily altered or maybe broad enough to capture all the roles and responsibilities that the public has asked for. I don't want us to whittle down our goals and to try to fit into a current system that maybe cannot accommodate this. So all I'm asking is to take a look and to make sure that we are creating a program that will benefit the community for years to come. And I also wanted to say, if we choose to do a monetary incentive, I think it has to go to all committees within Issaquah. And I really appreciate all your time and work, and thank you so much.
I see that Paul has joined us. Paul, please feel free to address the council.
Did you say Paul?
Yes, go ahead.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you everybody for being here, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. I wanted to make just a small comments related to just the work that has gone on for the last year, and I really want to thank the Human Services folks and all the people who made so many convenings possible and so many conversations possible. Starting with Monica and a lot of other folks. But my comments were just, as much as there's a thank you for the opportunity to get to this point, it has been a year. And I think where we started and where the city of Issaquah started and where city council started and what their hopes were for, all this started after George Floyd. And it has been a year since George Floyd. But if we look at action for folks of color, we would say nothing's really changed. It's still the same. There's no ordinance, there's no law, there's nothing that has been passed. It's still the same world that we lived in before George Floyd. There's just a lot of more people who are aware. And this has been the story about race and a lot of different issues related to people of color in America. It's where we say a lot of things, you hear a lot of things, you get to know, and then nothing happens and life goes on. So my hope today is that we start taking those first steps towards concrete action that will actually impact lives of people of color in Issaquah. That is really what I think the whole goal was from City Council. That is my hope, that that's what the citizens of Issaquah would like. And based on all the different conversations that I've been privileged and honored to be a part of, I know that's exactly what we're looking for. It is the action. And I know over the last few months, there's been a lot of conversations about, well, this is not, and even I've heard a few speakers earlier talking about, well, we need to explore more, for the people of color who hear that. And thank you very much for sharing your comments. This is a story that people of color have heard for 400 years. We need to explore some more. We need to wait. We need to do this, that, the other. In the meantime, we're still being impacted, while the people who are not people of color are still living exactly the way they've always lived. So this is the challenge of our times, is to say, when do we say enough is enough? Martin Luther King gave a very nice speech, the state capital of Montgomery. He said, how long is it going to take? And now remember, Martin Luther King has passed on for several decades. And that's a question that even I'm asking myself. So how long is it going to take before we decide to take some action? And for the people who are not people of color who say not long, it's been a long time. I'm 49 years. So for 49 years, I'm still waiting. But every now and then it seems that, especially when we get to this point, there is another delay. We call them tactics, delay tactics. There's another, why can't we just do this other way? It's easy when you're not affected to say these things and believe these things. And I'm not saying that anyone has bad intent, but we've waited long enough. I think your citizens are telling you they've waited long enough. It's time to take some action. The old frameworks that we've used, quite frankly, have not worked. So that call or that urge or that itch to say, let's use this framework that works so well here is something that we want to do. No, it doesn't work. I'm here to remind you that they haven't worked. We passed the Civil Rights Act of this country, which was a watershed moment. And even that was not enough. Even that was not enough. So you're going to have to continue pushing, and you're going to have to continue stretching that. This is, as much as we love to move hearts and minds, there's some hearts and minds that don't move. So you have to change behavior. And change behavior comes with action. Change behavior comes with legislation. Change behavior comes with passing what you need to pass as citizens if you really, really care about the issue. And I just really want to thank you for the time you've given me today.
Thank you very much. City Clerk, has anyone else signed up to speak this evening?
No one else has signed up to speak, but I would like to give those on the call one last opportunity to indicate if they'd like to make comments at this point in the meeting. So if you're interested in commenting tonight, if you're on the phone, you can press *3 to raise your virtual hand. If you're on a computer, you need to look for the small hand icon. Typically, it can be found in the participant panel. Going to monitor the list for just a moment. Looks like we do have another individual who'd like to make comments. Sean Stewart. Sean, in just a moment here, you should have the option to turn your video on and unmute.
Well, good evening, and thank you for this opportunity. I'll leave my video on mute. I have a toddler in the room, while my wife is preparing dinner. But I'd like to thank you for this. Thank you for this opportunity, and the Human Services staff, especially Monica, Hannah, Marisol. I spoke at the Juneteenth celebration for Issaquah, and that was the right step in the right direction to creating equality and convincing, educating people on the subject of equality. But I'm truly excited about the Equity Board and optimistic. First and foremost, the title of the framework, the proper framework that you've established by naming it Equity Board signifies a more permanent solution. I think if you would have named it a task force or committee, which has a more temporary title to it, and in organizational culture, the nuances of language make a huge difference in terms of how people perceive what the group is formed for. So with an Equity Board, it signifies that this is a permanent solution focused on equality, meaning no one is demoted or no particular race is brought down into a certain demoted into a hierarchy. Everyone is equal. And I think the formation of this board signifies that change is coming. And I like the fact that there is, some people speak of immediate change, but I don't want a knee-jerk reaction. I think, everyone throws around these buzzwords, reform, but I think something is more sweeping is in order. Reform has occurred over the years. There's been tampering and small tinkering with policy, educational systems, state policy, state legislation, and it hasn't benefited the minorities for the last 110 years. So I think something more sweeping is in order, and I think the form of a board, which signifies a more permanent solution and not just going with the status quo of today. It will be around more permanently and to solve the problem of equality and create this equality within the city. So I think it's a great, great step in the right direction, and I look forward and extremely optimistic about the formation of the board. And thank you all for letting me speak.
Great, thank you very much. City Clerk, while Sean was talking, did anyone else sign up to speak this evening at this time?
I don't know.
All right, great. We will next pass it off to Council President Hunt to summarize any email comments that have come through. I first just want to thank Cindy, James, Susan, Paul, and Sean for sharing your thoughts this evening. Thank you. And Council President Hunt, you're up.
And Councilmember Hall, excuse me for the interruption. I do just see that a virtual hand has been raised. Would you like to reopen the public comment?
Just in time. Let's do that. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Kurt Mueller, I see that you've raised your hand. If you'd like to address the council, we'll go ahead and move you up as a panelist in just a moment. You should have the option to turn your video on if you'd like and unmute.
Okay, great. Sorry, my phone video doesn't work. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, Kurt.
Okay, great. So first of all, I'm excited that Issaquah is considering this proposal, and I strongly support the idea of an equity board and echo some of the sentiments of the last two gentlemen who spoke. In an ideal world, if the system was working, then you would look around on the board and we would have a diverse, highly representative board membership and active involvement from all of these different communities. For historical reasons, things have not worked out that way. And the gentlemen both pointed out examples of starts in the past to make change that haven't brought about results. And so another important aspect of all this for me kind of goes back to my past life working in public schools. There was an attitude in the school districts where I worked on the part of some of the voters that, why should I pay for this? I don't have kids in the school anymore. And in my mind, that was a very short-sighted view in the sense that the people who are in the community are going to be in the community whether you take care of them or not. And in the same sort of way, the people who are in the community and with the changes in the diversity of the community of Issaquah are going to be here whether we help them or not. And so we're at a moment when things are changing, when there's an opportunity to reach out to bring in people so that people can access the same kind of support network, the same kind of access to government, understand the power that they have as members of our community, and we can welcome them in a way that they can participate comfortably. And I feel it's very important. And the council has a great opportunity here to influence the way we move forward in Issaquah as a community. And so by giving opportunity to all is how we should be measuring our community. And the strength of our community lies in the strength and ability and prosperity of the people who are least advantaged within our community. And so thank you for allowing me to address the committee. And I look forward to the equity board moving ahead.
Thank you very much, Kurt. City Clerk, I'll check in one more time to see if anyone else has signed up.
No one else has indicated a desire to speak.
All right, perfect. We will pass it off to Council President Hunt then to summarize any email comments that we've received.
Thank you, Councilmember Hall. This is Council President Hunt, and while we've been having virtual meetings, I have been summarizing emails that we've received specifically on topics that we're discussing. So this evening, we are discussing ID 0919 Equity Board Proposal, and we did receive 3 emails that specifically reference this topic tonight. One of the people who emailed us also spoke in public comments, so that person summarized their own comments. Then of the other 2 that referenced this topic, they expressed concerns with the current proposal, asked questions for our consideration, and also proposed different approaches than what was described in the proposal. Then regarding ID 0927, the equity framework discussion, we received 1 email that specifically referenced this item. And on this item, the person that wrote to us wrote that they preferred of the 2 options, the STEP model. And that concludes emailed comments that reference tonight's agenda items.
Thank you very much, Council President Hunt. With that, I believe that we are ready to move into our second agenda item, which is ID 0919, Equity Board Proposal, presented by Monica Negrilla, our Human Services Manager, Manuel Brown, Human Services Commissioner, and I'm so sorry, Lucrecia Chodo, Human Services Commissioner. Please correct me on your name, and thank you very much to be here to present for us.
Good evening, council members. This is Monica Negrilla. Thank you so much for having us tonight. As you mentioned, I'm the Human Services Manager here at the city, and I'm also the staff liaison to the Human Services Commission. I have had the pleasure and the honor to provide staff support to the Human Services Commission and to build relationships with the larger community here in Issaquah over the last several months as we worked through the recommendations of proposing an equity board. What you will hear tonight, along with the information we presented at the May 25th Council study session, is really the product of a strong and meaningful community engagement process over the last nearly 10 months, almost 1 year. And so before we begin, I would like to welcome Human Services Commissioner Man Brown and Lucrecia Choto, who have been part of the subcommittee work on this proposal and who would like to make a couple of opening remarks. As you probably noted, in addition to the commissioners presenting with me tonight, we had other commissioners present, and also we have community members who've been part of this process over the last months. And so with that, Commissioner Brown, you have the floor.
Hello, good evening, council members and Mayor Pauly. My name is Manuel Brown. My family and I have been residents of Issaquah for the past 26 years, and I'm now a member of the city's Human Services Commission. And I also participate in other activities in our community. We were introduced last study session. I was encouraged by the response we received from this council regarding the proposal of the Equity Board and hope that today's presentation will address the questions and concerns that were raised during the May 13th study session. I'm here today as a representative of one of the many faces of people of Issaquah and support the extraordinary work of the city staff and Human Services Commissioners on the out-of-the-box thinking process to deliver today's proposal. I'm confident that the council will continue to lead the way in King County and the state of Washington in moving towards equity for all its residents. I'm looking forward to further discussions. Thank you. And now to Commissioner Lucrecia Choto.
Buenas noches, honorables miembros del Concilio y Alcaldesa Pauly. Good evening, council members and Mayor Pauly. As Monica Negrilla and Commissioner Brown have stated, I am Lucrecia Choto. You did a fine job, Councilmember Hall, in pronouncing my name. I am an immigrant from Guatemala. My family and I moved to Issaquah 3 years ago next month. Through the community convenings, we learned that there has been an influx of demographic change in our community. My family, along with many other attendees, represent that change. Since 1990, Issaquah has changed from being mostly a homogeneous community made up of 95% European Americans to today being an approximately 65% representation. This translates to a more heterogeneous community that now consists of 35% people of color, and this will continue to grow. It is their voice that I need for you to hear today, not just mine. If you attended the convenings or watched the recordings, you may have noticed a pattern of grassroots involvement by a good portion of the participants. I bring this to your attention because whereas you may not see us participating in official capacities, many of us are very active in the community. The Equity Board is the first step to provide the diverse members of our community a voice through a common official venue. We are committed to working with you, our neighbors, so that together we can create an Issaquah that allows various voices to have a say in how the city develops. Thank you for allowing me these words at the beginning. I will also have remarks in the conclusion.
Thank you very much, Commissioners. This is Monica again. Tisha and Jillian, if you're available now, we can start presenting the PowerPoint slides, and we can move to the second PowerPoint slide. And while you're doing that, thank you so much for presenting for us. So with that, council members, tonight, as you already know, we are returning to council to further discuss the Equity Board proposal. Our goal tonight is to present a draft ordinance establishing an Issaquah Equity Board. This draft incorporates City Council's feedback from the May 25th, 2021 Council study session. And with that, we can go to the next slide. Thank you very much. So in terms of direction needed, we are seeking Council's feedback on the proposed ordinance. And actually, you can move to the next slide also. Thank you. So we are seeking Council's feedback on the proposed draft equity ordinance and the directions regarding next steps. And we are also seeking feedback on the preliminary information regarding stipends for members that we proposed, and also directions regarding next steps. Next slide, please. So here I would like to briefly review the background of the work completed to this date. As you may recall, in August of last year, the Police Accountability, Equity, and Human Services Action Plan assigned the Human Services Commission the task of reviewing the role of residents in the city's equity initiatives. And here, I'm going to pause for a moment, council members, to extend my heartfelt appreciation to the Commission for taking on such a big and meaningful task for the city. For a volunteer board, I think that was a huge undertaking. And so for the long evenings, for the many hours of research, documentation, community conversation, and outreach, commissioners, please really accept our thanks and gratitude. The work over the last nearly 10 months included a really thorough community outreach process. We started with a mid-year commission recruitment to ensure diverse community members are invited, represented, and actively involved in the process. We conducted equity training for all commissioners to ensure a common understanding of equity concepts, and also we learned how to conduct meaningful community engagement. We then focused and conducted 3 focus groups with community members representing the diverse communities. We engaged with residents and grassroots groups such as the Issaquah Community and Inclusion Group, the Issaquah Student Equity Council, Right to Breathe, and others. And then we also conducted 2 equity convenings. So following that comprehensive, meaningful, and authentic community conversation, the Commission completed its first recommendation in April of 2021 and presented its first draft recommendations to Council in the following month in May. So tonight, we are here returning to Council with incorporated feedback from that May 25th Council study session. Next slide, please. So feedback heard during the study session in May included an agreement on the need and interest to create an equity board to help advise the city on equity-related initiatives. Proposed recommendations and revisions that we heard included addressing the authority role of the equity board, further defining the broad scope of work, with considering the creation of a task force to help address such details. And then we also heard feedback about providing additional details and analysis regarding the stipends we proposed, and also considering broadening the use of stipends to include all boards and commissions. So to help avoid further delay in creating an equity board and to help begin operationalizing the proposed work, the Human Services Commission worked on incorporating the feedback received. On one end, the Commission addressed the role of authority and oversight proposed in the initial recommendation to note that this is an advisory board to the mayor and city council. Secondly, the Commission worked on defining the scope and responsibilities of the proposed board to really help eliminate that need for another task force or temporary board. And this included consulting and advising the mayor and city council on three main areas: city equity initiatives, select policy development, and really building relationships with the diverse groups in Issaquah. And next, we also provided additional information regarding stipends. These are detailed in the attachment B of your agenda packet, and we would love to answer any questions that you might have on those. Next slide, please. Here, I would like to address in a few words why we decided to propose creating an equity board directly instead of a temporary board. The Human Services Commission, as you know, is returning to council with a draft ordinance that we hope helps address the feedback obtained without having to create a task force or a temporary board. As Commissioner Chodo shared with me earlier today, and I'm quoting her, "We need a board instead of a task force because the scope of the work that needs to be carried out merits a committed group of people with the specific task of equity and inclusion." I'm ending quotation marks. So with that, proposing the creation of an equity board directly instead of a task force or a temporary board was decided for the following reasons. This was based on feedback that we heard from the community and city council that currently there is equity-related work underway or in planning phases for which the expertise and lens of an equity board was needed. We also heard that the Human Services Commission has been working on this task for nearly 10 months, and it has been serving as a task force during this time. Specifically, the subcommittee comprised of 3 commissioners have been dedicating often up to 15 hours a week to this level of work. So we did hear that the work needs to be distributed more evenly to a designated board whose charge is to carry out this work. And then lastly, the Human Services Commission is really already ready to restart its work on human services related items that have been postponed or canceled so far. With that, we believe that the draft ordinance that we propose clarified roles and responsibilities. The goal of creating a temporary entity would be to define this, but since we believe that the draft ordinance already defines them, providing a balance between clarifying the advisory role of the board and providing specific roles and responsibilities to the newly proposed entity, we believe that a task force was no longer needed. And of course, lastly, I think creating a task force or a temporary board prior to an actual board would also entail creating new rules and regulations for a temporary entity, a recruitment process, selecting members with limited term, then recruiting again for a permanent board. So this can further cause delays in the equity-related work that the city would like to accomplish. Next slide, please. Therefore, based on feedback received at the City Council study session in May, as well as in an attempt to align this board with other boards and commissions at the city, the recently created environmental board was used as a model for this ordinance. And so our proposed ordinance addresses the objectives of the board, membership, meeting rules, staff support, duties and responsibilities. A detailed description is included in attachment A, the draft ordinance establishing an equity board. And again, we are available to go over any questions that you might have specifically about any of those described in the draft ordinance. Next slide, please. In terms of creating or considering alternatives to an equity board, as noted in our presentation and report at the May 25th Council study session, when the Commission addressed the task to review the role of residents in the city's equity initiatives, the Human Services Commission considered changes to the role and scope of the Human Services Commission, changes to other boards and commissions, and also other options. In framing its recommendations to create a standalone equity board and not incorporate equity elements in other city work plan items, the Human Services Commission obtained feedback from community members, from equity consultants like Dr. Pat Effiam and Benita Horn, Paul Wally of the Right to Breed Committee. Also, we obtained feedback from information learned during training, individual and group research, as well as information gathered from other jurisdictions, which was also included in the May 25th Council presentation and report. So the Human Services Commission began the work actually initially on this equity-related task with an original intent to make modifications to the role and scope of the existing Human Services Commission. However, after hearing community feedback and after experiencing the time commitment needed to address equity-related topics, the Commission decided to propose a standalone board to help advise on equity-related matters at the city. Additional consideration was made regarding the role of other city boards and commissions in addressing equity in the city, including inviting perhaps representatives from other boards and commissions to participate in the equity board, or for the equity board to be available to other boards and commissions for further consultation. In searching for other options and input obtained from the community, as well as, I apologize, I'm going to try again. So in searching for other options, input obtained from the community, work from other jurisdictions, and additional research called attention to the importance, complexity, and broad scope of work included in the equity-related work. And also its importance for the overall health of the community, as you also heard from some comments earlier tonight. And so therefore calling for the creation of a separate resident board or commission to address equity-related matters seemed like the natural proposal for the commission. Next slide, please. So in summarizing and going over the options we are proposing tonight, regarding the equity board ordinance, we are proposing the following three options. On one end, to return to a future regular council meeting with an ordinance to create an equity board. Two, to perhaps consider further revisions to the ordinance to include additional feedback that we obtained from you tonight. Or three, to decide not to create an equity board at this time. Next slide, please. In terms of options for stipends that we would like to propose, the first option would be to perhaps return with a draft citywide policy on stipends for all boards and commissions. Or secondly, to perhaps pilot stipends and propose stipends for the equity board only as a pilot project initially, and then further analyze. Or three, to offer no stipends at this time and reconsider the proposal in the future. Next slide, please. And again, in terms of the Human Services Commission's recommendations, the Commission recommends the creation of an equity board from the beginning without creating a temporary board or task force. This is both timely and impactful. This is timely because we would like to honor the feedback we heard from the community early on and from City Council regarding current and planned equity initiatives needing a channel for authentic community voice. Also, the Human Services Commission, as you heard, must focus on addressing other sensitive community needs and human services related items. And then it is impactful because it sends a powerful message to the community on our shared values and commitment as a city. So as a result, to summarize, the Human Services Commission recommends establishing a new equity board to advise the mayor and city council on equity initiatives and policies, and to help build relationships with diverse communities in Issaquah. Next slide, please. In terms of timing and next steps, we are here to receive council's feedback tonight, and if approved, we can return with an ordinance or follow any other direction provided. And lastly, next slide, please. Just to restate, we are seeking council's feedback On one, the proposed draft equity ordinance and directions regarding next steps, and two, feedback on the preliminary information regarding stipends for members and directions regarding next steps. And with that concludes our presentation. Before taking questions, I believe Commissioners Brown and Choto would like to make a couple of final closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. This is Commissioner Brown. In addition to what has been brought to your attention in the draft ordinance in regards to changing demographics in the census of data in 1990 and 2019 of Issaquah, please note that although our current adult people of color population stands around 35%, our white student population stands around 47%. The population of students of color in Issaquah School District is currently between 46 and 53%, depending on the definition of people of color. These numbers represent the trajectory of the future population of our city. I mention this to emphasize that the face of Issaquah is changing. The environment is changing, and the needs of the people are changing. Our city processes, our ideas, our thoughts, and the constraints of how we work and whom we serve must also change. Developing this equity board is a process. What we propose today is not a fix-all, but I, along with my fellow Human Services commissioners and many of Issaquah's residents, believe it's a step in the right direction, an important step towards equity, which will bring us all even closer to our goal we all strive for, which is equality. Thank you for your time this evening. I'll turn it over to Commissioner Choto.
Concilio y Alcaldesa Polly, muchas gracias por su tiempo. Council members and Mayor Polly, thank you for your time and for giving us this opportunity to represent the various community voices. It is my deepest desire that you, the council, and the mayor recognize the need for an equity board. As the demographics of Issaquah have changed and will continue to do so, it is imperative that we remain open-minded and reach out to the community as it evolves. Our committee and the Human Services Commission believe that establishing an equity board will ensure that Issaquah has the necessary policies and procedures to help us create an inclusive city. Issaquah is all of us. It is in our collective interest to ensure that we progress together. By having equitable access to education, training, employment, housing stock, and all of the resources that are necessary for success. When our community was 95% European American, we had a shared cultural and economic identity, which did not make the need to address equity quite so apparent. Today, with approximately 35% people of color residing here and growing, we no longer have the same shared socioeconomic identity and lived experience. This difference results in the need to ask different questions, involve different people, and designate an equity board. The Human Services Commission, and this committee in particular, could advocate for a task force to continue, but that is not what the community has asked for. The community is asking for an equity board. An equity board will provide a permanent, official point of contact for the community to engage with its local government. The community needs a permanent and ongoing entity that is charged to represent their interests and needs. An equity board will help us move from a theoretical inclusiveness to an actually inclusive and equitable community. An equity board is an important part of holding ourselves accountable to ensure that the changing community voices are included, heard, and that their needs are met. It is time to bring community members who have historically mobilized independently with their own resources into more formalized roles. We need to move from reacting to the needs of the vulnerable members to actually including them in the decision-making process. It is imperative that we ensure equitable access to resources. Basically, we are only as successful as the least prepared members of our community. Equal access to resources is the only way that we can have an Issaquah with similar levels of historic socioeconomic prosperity for all. It is my deepest hope that I have represented the community voices adequately and that you are able to hear and accept our request for an equity board. Muchas gracias por su tiempo. Thank you for your time.
Well, thank you very much to Human Services Manager Monica Negrilla and Commissioners Choto and Brown. Thank you for the detailed presentation, for all your hard work over the last year. I think anyone listening in can just feel the passion behind your words. So thank you very much. Now I think we're ready for council questions. If anyone has any questions on the presentation, on the ordinance, any questions on the details that we have here on the stipend information, now would be a good time to ask. And then just also a note that council members Ray and Goodman have sent in some questions that City Administrator Bobkowitz will also read off. So let's go ahead and start with Councilmember Martz.
Thank you, Councilmember Hall. Couple questions. The first is, I note there is not a specific stipend suggestion here. Is the feedback the administration is looking for more of a, yes, we want to consider stipends, no, we don't want to consider stipends, or are they looking to have a conversation about what a stipend amount would be like this evening?
Thank you, Councilmember Mars. This is Monica. Yes, we are just looking for high-level, broad information. We just provided preliminary information to help you decide. That's why we provided information about other jurisdictions and then just high-level ranges for information, including costs. So at this time on our end, the question would be, would you like, based on what you see there, would you like us to return with a policy that would provide more details on that? Yeah, on our end, we were not looking for talking in details about amounts, at least from staff perspective.
Thank you, Ms. Negrilla. So my second question is, how do we see things parsing out between the Human Services Commission and the new Equity Board? I ask because so often challenges of communities of color are tied directly to economic disequality that exists. And so I look at something like a low-income housing strategy, and I can see that as something that Equity Board would want to look at, and I see that as something that a Human Services Commission would want to look at. But if we're going to, if this entity is going to have teeth, you know, I hear strongly and understand strongly the urge to move beyond planning, you know, to actual moving the dial or moving the needle, I should say. And so I get that. And how do you not water down the role of the Equity Board if you don't have a clear demarcation between what the council is going to look to the Human Services Commission for guidance on and what the council is going to look to the Equity Board for guidance on in this model? That's my question.
Thank you so much for that question. And again, this is Monica. And I think that is a great question. And that is both a challenge and a blessing with the role of equity, since it really touches everything that the city does, right? It touches human services, it touches environment, it touches transportation. So that's why I think initially when we first proposed that the responsibilities and the scope was so broad, because you can make a case that it touches everything. And so that's why coming back to you, I think we selected a few items to begin with. And I think naturally there will be a pilot, at least for the first year, as the board will start working and trying to select which policies to prioritize. And I think this is where we would look to you as council and to Mayor Pauly in assigning specific policies that you think that are more of a priority for the city. That's why I think we included the city's strategic plan. Probably that would be the first step that we would start as prioritizing which policies to look at. Because you're right, otherwise equity touches everything and there would be an overlap. in terms of separating the specific question that you mentioned with human services, in affordable housing, for example, human services would look at the impact of services and kind of like focusing on gaps in services and needs in the community, whereas the equity board will look and provide that lens on really providing that focus of what questions we did not consider from a community perspective, and the community is more impacted by different policies that the city has. So at least initially, these are our initial thoughts. Does that help answer your question?
It is an answer to my question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good questions, Councilmember Martz. Anyone else have a question for Monica or our commissioners at this time? I have a quick question then before we go to City Administrator Bobkowitz to read off some of our other colleagues' questions. Monica, when you and the Human Services Commission were involved in looking into alternatives, on our list we have modify Human Services Commission, change or modify another board or commission or other. I'm curious, what you might have seen out there in terms of other jurisdictions or partner organizations in terms of unique alternatives that they might be doing, or does it seem like most organizations in our region are kind of leaning toward this effort?
Thank you, Councilmember Hall. And I think here again, that's in looking and collaborating with other jurisdictions, most of them do have or are trying to create a diversity and inclusion board or commission or committee. Some of them have task force. So mainly what we also expanded our research with staff and nationally what's out there. So everybody that we learned from, they are mainly trying to create a board or commission. But I think what's most important from what we learned is that we did not find a perfect or an ideal solution. I think communities across the nation are still trying to figure out what the best options are. They are working with consultants, they're working with communities. And I think what we heard most is that nobody has it figured out. And we heard often, you just need to jump in the water and try things out, but just don't keep on waiting. So while this might not be an exact answer, we really did not find creative solutions that we felt like, okay, this is something that we need to implement.
No, I thought that was a good answer, Monica. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. If there's no other questions, I think we'll pass it off to City Administrator Bobkowitz if you're ready to read off Deputy Council President Ray's questions and any questions Councilmember Goodman may have had.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Hall, members of the council, and members of the commission. Let me first also share my thanks with the members of the commission for their outstanding work, and we look forward as we move forward on these issues to accomplish, I think, what everyone is looking to accomplish here, and that's greater inclusion of all Issaquah residents and how we, do business as a municipal government. So with that, as Councilmember Hall mentioned, both the Deputy Council President Ray and Councilmember Goodman are not with us this evening. They have passed along questions and comments. And so let me start with the questions from Deputy Council President Ray. The first question is, are there other similar equity boards that are functioning in other cities similar to Issaquah? If so, were they consulted, and what was the result of the consolidation? And Monica, I think you've answered a little bit of this question already. Are there specific neighbor communities, other communities in the region that have been talked to?
Yes, we had talked to the Human Services Commission hosted a meeting, I believe in March, where we invited other jurisdictions. And specifically, we heard from the city of Renton, Linwood, and also the city of Tequila. So we heard about their commissions and task force and their journey on this equity work. And then in addition to those guests, the commission had a chance to ask questions and coordinate with the staff, expanded research to other jurisdictions, as we said, nationwide. And we provided a summary in the May 25th council study session, but we would be happy to resend the information out and additional information as well.
Great, thank you. His next question is, what level of public comment was received by the Human Services Commission in preparing this ordinance?
Thank you for that question as well. So I think, and I apologize for repeating myself a little bit from our previous presentation, but I believe our entire work over the last 10 months, it was a large community engagement process. One thing that we learned early on is that classic methods of engaging with community members might not work. And I think when I say classic is, let's have a plan, let's create a plan of action, let's propose something, and then let's conduct a community engagement to hear from the community. We heard that it's more meaningful if we have community members at the table from the very beginning when we start brainstorming options before we create a plan, and then have everybody at the table as we create a plan and throughout the process. And so this was our intent, and this is what we attempted to do. And that's why I think from the very beginning, when the Human Services Commission took on this task, we started with looking around the room and seeing who are we missing. And so the first community engagement process was really to do a mid-year recruitment to make sure that we have diverse community members representing Issaquah at the table. And so with that, then we continued the work with engaging other residents and also engaging other grassroots groups, as well as more formalized groups, as you heard me earlier tonight, from the Issaquah Community and Inclusion Group, from the Student Council, from Right to Breathe, and other residents from who you might have heard tonight or on other occasions. So those were the general, like the entire process was a community-driven process. But also specifically, we did also 3 focus groups and 2 large community convenings that all of these informed the recommendations that you were presented with.
Thank you. 2 additional questions. The next one, I believe, Ms. McGrill is pretty well answered. Was there any public outreach to help guide the creation of the equity board? And I think you've covered that, so thank you. And then finally, Deputy Council President Zuberi's last question. In the staff report, it said the community is eager to have a board on equity. This implies some level of community engagement. Can this be described? So perhaps, you know, of the various opportunities, can you maybe estimate the number of people that either participated in the meetings or made comments to give a sense of the numbers of folks?
Yes, absolutely. During the focus groups, we kept those smaller to provide opportunities for meaningful conversations. So we had at the focus groups, we had about 40 participants. And then at the convenings, we had over 50 participants in each of the sessions with an overall over 80% of unduplicated residents. And I'm saying that just because at the 2 convenings, we had some residents who participate in both convenings.
Great. And Council Member Hall, I don't know if you'd like me just to move right on to Councilmember Goodman's questions.
Yeah, I think so. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
He has 4 questions. The first is, what specifically is included in section 2.94.050 regarding policy, plans, regulations, and codes? Is this literally everything as the ordinance reads?
Would like to take a moment to look at that really quick, but I think the intent was not to review everything. The intent of the commission in proposing was really to provide broad enough, but also specific enough venue to where this would provide an opportunity for mayor and city council to really assign any policies that council would consider appropriate for the board to review.
Thank you. The next question, I think you've now just probably already answered, is including everything really the intent of this ordinance? And I think you've answered that question. Number 3 is that she would like the administration to provide some flow charts for how specific items would work their way through a proposed new equity board. It's not at all clear what would go through that board and at what point in the process. For example, would all of Title 18 go through the new board as well as the Planning Policy Committee? I don't know, Monica, if there's anything really to add at this point. In the email, that Councilmember Goodman sent this evening, she asked that the administration have more formal answers to these questions at the next time this item is before the council. So perhaps that's more appropriate, unless you have anything you want to add, Monica.
No, I don't think so at this time. City Administrator Barkowitz, thank you.
The last question is it possible to reshuffle some deck chairs' responsibilities rather than form a new 9-member board? For example, could staff review grant applications and make recommendations that the Human Services Commission reviews and then recommends from there, rather than the commission doing the time-consuming work of reviewing all the grants? That's how all the other boards work. Staff does the work and the board reviews that work and makes recommendation from there. Could the Human Services Commission then be broadened in terms of scope and makeup of members in order to do the work that is proposed for the new board? My concern is the resources it takes to have a new board with the limited resources of a city our size. And again, Monica, I think you've probably covered most of that and the importance that the commission feels coming out with the recommendations as it is. If you want to add anything, please go ahead.
Thank you, City Administrator Bobkowitz. I think, yes, as we stated earlier, we heard through the many months of community engagement of the importance of this topic. We also heard tonight. And then also in addition, the Human Services Commission truly experienced over the last 10 months the fact that really the Commission did not have a chance to address any human services related topics. And so while even at the very beginning, we thought that, okay, this may be something that the Human Services Commission can take on, realistically in terms of time commitment, on every single commission meeting in the last 10 months, we always stayed over time. We added extra meetings, and this was just to do the work on the equity. We on and on and on. Every time we tried to put an agenda item that had to do with human services, we had to postpone it or cancel it because we just did not have the time. So realistically, I would be concerned about how that would work unless we create a commission that's going to meet bi-weekly or weekly, and it's going to extend to 3-4 hour meetings.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you, Monica. And Councilmember Hall, I have comments from Councilmember Ray in addition to his questions at the appropriate time.
Great. Thank you very much to you too. Okay, I think that wraps up questions from the council, unless I'll just give one last chance. Anyone on council want to ask any questions? All right. Well, with that, then I think we're going to move on to public comment and provide an opportunity for those on the line who would like to make a comment about this agenda item in particular. I know there's one person at least from earlier who said they'd like to make their comments now, so I'll turn it over to Clerk Keyser.
Yes, and I'd like to ask, we have a few individuals who have their virtual hand raised from the earlier comment time, Sean Stewart and Susan Neville. So unless you were wanting to make comments again at this point, if you could please lower your virtual hand. And anyone else who would like to speak at this time, please raise your virtual hand by pressing *3 if you're on the phone or selecting the small hand icon in the participant panel. And Susan Leonelli has expressed a desire to speak. Susan, in just a moment, you should have an option to turn your video on and unmute.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to comment. I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Susan Leonelli, currently serving as the chair of the Human Services Commission. And I wanted to just add my thanks to my fellow commissioners and staff, support by Monica and others, to really take on this incredibly important and transformational work. As Monica expressed, it has really been an honor and an incredible effort to kind of get us to this point. I would also like to extend my thanks to the mayor, our city council, and staff for the excellent guidance and feedback that you've provided along the way. I think it's really been very helpful for us to produce something that is reflective of the needs of the community, but also importantly framed within the scope of our own city values and created in a way to be operational and fitting within our principles of how we run business in the city of Issaquah. And that's very important. We have to take ideas to action. And I really do think that getting going soon is a great idea because of the potential to start having impact now. We certainly understand that any first year in a board, you will have a cycle of learning and growing and finding out and possibly adjusting along the way. But through the community learnings and conversations, we're aware of such an incredible body of work that we already know needs to be done, that there feels like there's not much value to be gained by delaying or sending this back for further consideration. I believe that we need to get going and really start to put some points on the board and make that impact that I think we all know we would like to start creating that positive momentum. So again, appreciate the opportunity to provide some additional supportive comments. And again, thank you very much for the commission's work and thank you very much for the work that you're doing on the city council. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much, Susan. City Clerk, has anyone else signed up to provide comment?
Yes, Jacob Rubenstein has indicated a desire to speak. Jacob, in just a moment, you should have the option to turn your video on and unmute.
Hello, can you hear me? Awesome.
Yes.
Okay. Hi, my name is Jacob Rubenstein. Thank you to everyone for letting me have a platform to speak here. I'm a rising senior at Liberty High School, which is part of the Issaquah School District. So I am I guess I'm representing some youth here. Every day, and so I don't have to detail it, but I and everyone else sees and hears about events which prove why this equity board is necessary. And although I understand why we have things like this meeting, like it's a formal procedures, I think we can all understand why a board such as this equity board, especially now and this time, is necessary. And everyone else has done a really good job of speaking about the momentum we've had this past year and the best way to garner the momentum as a community. I was lucky enough to be part of the focus groups that you all were talking about earlier, and hearing how passionate like other members of the city were about racial and social equity only emphasized the need to me of a board like this equity board. So that's just my 2 cents on why I think this equity board is not only would be very positive for the city, but also in some ways necessary. Thank you for letting me speak and contribute.
Paul Lawali has also indicated a desire to speak on this topic. Paul, in just a moment, you'll have the option to turn your video on and unmute.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you again for everybody who's given us this opportunity to speak and all the work that's going on and all the conversation that's happened. I just want to reiterate again, I know I spoke earlier, and just to reiterate a few things to council. I listened to the questions that were brought up, very thoughtful questions, but I really have to remind council that, as duly elected folks in Issaquah, that any system is defined by the people in it, which means you. And being anti-racist really means turning up the heat on how racism lives within us. So once you're aware, it's your duty to take action. And I'm hoping that you will take the necessary action. You've heard from a lot of people who've spoken at a lot of different gatherings and have expressed how they feel about what action really looks like. This is one of those times that I will have to impress on you and push hard, because I've lived through this, and a lot of us have lived through this many a times where we are asked to give our opinions about what's wrong or what's not happening just for nothing to happen. So we have prostituted our voices for so long, coming to a lot of community engagements that we're invited to. So we would love to hear from you just for nothing to happen. And it, quite frankly, it's gotten very old. And quite frankly, the system that is defined by the people within the system need to acknowledge that and really turn the corner and say, okay, let's not make excuses. Let's not add more layers. Let's not add more questions. Let's just take an action. And faith is taking the first step when you can't see the top of the staircase. Yet another Martin Luther King quote. This is the time to take action. What are you going to do? A lot of people are looking at you. A lot of people are expecting a lot from you. And I do believe that you can make the right decision. But it is time for action. Thank you.
I'm checking now to see if there's anyone else that's indicated a desire to speak. I believe that some chats may have been sent to the meeting host by an attendee. The council members are unable to see those messages, so if you'd like to address the council, please let us know by indicating so in the chat or raising your virtual hand. I see that Sean Stewart's hand is raised. Sean, this may be a carryover from earlier, but just in case, let's go ahead and move you up as a panelist.
Good evening. Thank you again for this opportunity. It was it was a new opportunity to speak. So again, thank you all. And I think it speaks volumes that you all are having this conversation regarding an equity board. And again, it's time. I agree with the gentleman previously who stated it's time to take action and to capitalize off of the public conversations regarding race, equality, inclusiveness. And I'm a military officer. So one of the first items that I look at when moving to a city is the diversity or the structure or the framework that promotes diversity. And I think when military personnel or military officers or enlisted members move to a city and they see that the formation of an equity board is happening or is in the process of happening, that provides a sense of I would say belonging to move into that city. And as military personnel, we move around the country a lot, but we are also looking at permanent spots to move in. And so, it's kind of like a trial period where we move into certain places. And when you see that a city actually cares and is taking the steps to be at the forefront in terms of equality and inclusiveness, that raises that city to the top of the list as far as a permanent city to live in. And again, it's time to strike while the iron is hot to capitalize off of this, because America right now is facing a racial reckoning in terms of where the conversation is going regarding equality, inclusiveness, and it also speaks volumes that you're not just focused on now, but focused on future generations. And I think that's where you separate yourselves from any other city that's talking about forming a committee or a task force, but a board speaks more permanently that you are here to stay and to focus on future generations. And again, thank you all, and thank you for all the work that you have done. And again, for the Human Services personnel, Monica, Hannah, and Marisol, thank you again for all the hard work that you've done.
Cyrus Crone would like to make comments next. Cyrus, in just a moment, you should have the opportunity to unmute and turn your video on if you'd like.
Hello, can you hear me? Good evening, Council and esteemed guests. My question revolved around the Council's definition of BIPOC, and if you could define precisely how you define a person of color. When you look at the demographic and psychographic makeup of the city, it's been very encouraging over the last 10, 15 years to see the diversity in the community, particularly among Chinese, Indians, etc. We have Iranians, we have Egyptians, and it's really quite a diverse community. So I was just curious, how do you define BIPOC in this instance? And that was my question. I'd like to know how you're defining BIPOC as it pertains to the agenda.
Thank you for your comments. Cyrus, as a reminder, the staff and council members don't respond to questions at this time, but if you'd like to provide your email address, we can direct your question to city staff to provide a response.
Okay, I think it's important to define what that is as you're setting policy around terminology, because it's unclear what the baseline of that terminology is. So if council hasn't yet defined that, maybe they could direct us to their definition.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Councilmember Hall, I don't see that anyone else has indicated a desire to speak at this time.
Thank you very much, City Clerk. The next point in the agenda. Oh,
excuse me, we have one more resident that would like to speak.
Oh.
Tim Kimball, I will be promoting you as panelist and you'll be able to speak.
Hi, good evening, City Council members and staff. Thank you for this discussion. I've resided in Issaquah for 25 years now, and since 1996. Just a couple of comments with regards to the proposed ordinance that would establish an equity board to serve the city of Issaquah. I'm still struggling to find a compelling reason for the formation of such a board. Whereas I'm in full support of measures to promote diversity and inclusion in our city and ensure that there are no barriers to any person of color seeking equity. Seeking equity is a more nebulous issue and one that is often, I think, prone to division. It can lead to division between neighbors, students, and the community at large. And I think, moreover, it's a division that too often has the result of reaffirming roles of victims and oppressors within the community. I had some questions that I'll just skip at this point because I think a lot of them have been answered, but I think it's worth noting that the equity board appears to be exclusively a racial-centric effort, and I'm wondering why wouldn't we be more inclusive, take a more inclusive approach that would address bias based on gender, gender preference, religious affiliation, physical ability or limitations. And, unless there are documented issues or specific complaints from members of the community, which there may be, I admit that, I'm inclined to think that this would become a board that is in search of a problem that I don't know, really exists. And, I don't pretend to have an answer to issues of bias in our community or, present a panacea for mitigation of such biases. But I think there are a lot of really positive ways to promote diversity, to support Black and other minority-owned businesses that I'm very much in support of. For instance, searchable directories and online apps that list African-American owned businesses of all types, which residents can be made more aware of and encouraged to support. Multicultural events that can be held at one of Issaquah's underutilized parks, concerts, art events, food events that can be held with fees waived for minority-owned businesses and performers. And so, in short, in conclusion, I'd like to see our community do what seems to work best, and maybe even in greater measure, which is to promote, robust, healthy community engagement, encourage greater diversity and inclusion in positive and reaffirming ways, which might well be part of the functions of the board, which I would be in favor of. However, if it's just an agency that functions as an added layer of government whose main role is to critique civic policies and lawful practices, then I'm not sure that it's really a benefit to the community, but I'm open to, hearing reports or arguments to the contrary. But I'm not sure if I'm in favor of it at this time. So I'll stay tuned. Thanks for the conversation.
Councilmember Hall, we Thank you. We have had two other folks identify an interest in speaking tonight. The next being Kurt Mueller. Kurt, in just a moment, you'll have the option to turn on your video and unmute.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great, thanks. So as we've heard here tonight, there's a lot of support and excitement about moving ahead, a strong impetus from members of the community to take action. And to the last gentleman's comments, while I respect your comments and where you're coming from, I think if we look at the community and the demographic trends that were described in the report from the commission, look around the committee, look around the city government, I think it's pretty easy to see that we do not have 35% of people of color participating in the government now. We don't have people who are actively part of our community at the policy and decision-making level. And until we do, we cannot say that we're an inclusive community. I believe lots of activities to the types that the gentleman mentioned have already been done. We have community activities, we have food things, we have all kinds of things. Those are nice ways for people to meet each other. But in the end, those don't affect the power structure and change the course of the citizens in our community. Those things have not worked up until now to bring more people in, to have their voice heard. Those things have not worked up until now to change the life for people within the community. As the two gentlemen who spoke earlier and spoke again here at the end indicated, their lived experience has not been one of inclusion and participation in this community. And I think that it's vitally important that we respect the people within our community, hear what they're saying, and give them a place at the table, which is what this equity board is about. And thank you for the opportunity to speak again.
Thank you. And I see that Manny Brown would like to make a comment.
Thank you. I'm in the position of wearing two hats right now, one as a commissioner, one as a resident. And my commissioner hat on first to answer Councilman Mark's question about being inclusive or of other boards and that sort of thing. I think that equity transfers to everything that we touch in the city, including environmental, transportation, law enforcement, and that our first thought when we were doing this was to have some type of liaisons that from each of those boards that would mainly their thought process when they go to their meetings was to concentrate on, is this equitable and should I take this to the board? Right. So hope that helps on yours. And I take off the commission hat as a resident, I would have wished that something like this would happen 25 years ago when my kids were young, so that they would have the effects of what Issaquah could accomplish between then and now. And even though we're getting on the train late, I think it's important to get on the train. So thank you for your time.
And Councilmember Hall, I don't see that anyone else has indicated a desire to speak at this time.
Okay, are we sure? Thank you to everyone for providing comment on this very important agenda bill. Very much appreciated. All right, so the next part is to move on to council discussion. I see that Councilmember Martz has a quick process question, and I thought since two questions kind of came up during public comment, that we could have those answered before going into discussion as well, to the benefit of us. So we can go to Councilmember Martz for his question right now, but if there are other council members who have a problem with that, let me know. Councilmember Martz.
Thank you, Councilmember Hall. The process question is merely, once we get into discussion, I would like clarity on what specific guidance the administration is looking for today, because I heard it on stipend, but I'm unclear, for instance, if the administration is looking for guidance on general support for an equity board and how that relates to not taking a vote tonight. So usually we get a slide for something like that. So I'm just curious what the format of the feedback you're looking for this evening. Thank you.
And I see that City Administrator Bobkowitz has turned off his mic, so go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Councilmember Hall, Councilmember Martz. I think the slide that we had two items. One was to get general comment and feedback on the ordinance, that we believe that we are at a place now that after this evening with the council's concurrence, we would bring it to the full council for adoption. So that's the first piece of that. The second is the issue with the stipend. That's a broader issue that would potentially impact more than just this newly created board if the council so desires to do that. So that's a second issue to get some direction on next steps on the stipend.
Thank you. And if perhaps when we get to council discussion, if we could put up slide 9 from the slides, I think that shows, return our options, either return, revise, or no action, which I think would be helpful to have up while we talk. So if it's all right with council, I was hoping we could get answers to a couple questions that came up during public comment before we move into council discussion. And those were, how are we defining BIPOC communities? And then, did the Human Services Commission consider, equity in all its many forms for this, or was it focused on racial equity? We heard that one come up too. So perhaps Monica, you could start.
Thank you, Councilmember Hall. Thank you so much for that question. I would like to start answering that question with, in the draft ordinance that we proposed under the membership section, I would like to read off a section regarding qualifications, if I would be allowed. We note under membership that the selection of equity board members shall consist of individuals with expertise in diversity, equity, and inclusion work, or other related fields. The community members who have an interest in diversity, equity, and inclusion work as evidenced by training, personal experience, or actions. And we further describe that members of the equity board will include diversity of racial, ethnic, and cultural backgrounds, diversity of ages, lived experiences, disability, gender, sexual orientation, religion, diversity of professional backgrounds, etc. And so further, we say that the majority of members, we would hope that will be representative of the Black, Indigenous, and people of color members in the Issaquah community. So this is what we have defined so far, making a note that it is a broader, so we would like to include more than racial diversity, but we do note that the majority of members, we would like to be representatives of the Black, Indigenous, and people of color members in the Issaquah community. And if we further want to define, we did not provide the definition in the document, but we can further come back and define people of color, typically as a general introduction that can mean anything that's not included as a white, Caucasian, Indo-European, but we would be happy to further provide definitions if that would be helpful. Does that answer? Should I further describe more on this?
I think that's great, Monica. Thank you very much. And if other council members have more probing questions into that, they can indicate in the chat. So thank you very much. All right, with that, we should move into council discussion. So any comments from council members with regard to the equity board proposal? And perhaps we could quickly put up slide 9 from the PowerPoint that shows our options and have a discussion about this before then having a discussion about the stipend. All right, so I see Councilmember DiMichele. Go ahead.
There, I almost forgot to unmute myself. So So bear with me. I've got a number of things I'd like to say. Councilmember Hall, just some clarification. You said that we would, do you want to take comments on stipends separately? Is that your intent?
This is Councilmember Hall. This was just a suggestion, though, if folks want to fold it into the normal conversation, we think, our conversation on stipend will influence the other one. We might as well just throw our comments in. So whatever council members would like.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So first of all, I want to thank the Human Services Commission for all of their work. And I know it's been a long, hard slog, and but also I think for the thorough and compelling response to the council's previous work session. I think it was just outstanding, excellent work in thinking and presentation. So thanks to everyone. There are a couple of things I wanted to respond to, a couple of criticisms or comments that we've received. The first one is that the Equity Board is going to be too broad in its mandate. And so in my view, a broad mandate is baked into equity work. The council indicated a year ago that we wanted to infuse equity and an equity lens throughout city operations. And if that is what we are seeking, which is basically a transformation of our city to a place where everyone is not only welcome, but able to find housing and find work and raise kids and able to thrive in a safe environment, then the mandate of the Equity Board needs to be broad. It can't be confined to only the things that we define as appropriate for equity. It has to be those things which are brought to us, and those things may touch on every aspect of our city life. As Commissioner Brown said, it's everything from transportation to policing to environment. All of those things have had adverse effects on many parts of our community in the past. So if our lens is too narrow, we will leave out too many voices on too many subjects that need to be examined. The other thing I wanted to comment on, we've had input that the city needs to take more input and that there hasn't been enough of a community engagement process. And I just want to remind everybody that the city held a series of listening sessions. The council held listening sessions. The mayor held listening sessions. The Human Services Commission held listening sessions. All of us, I believe, sat on City Hall steps and listened to the Black Lives Matter protesters a year ago. All of us marched with Black Lives Matter. So what does it say to the people who already participated, many of whom shared personal stories of hurt and anguish, that now we need more information and that we haven't engaged the community? I think it tells our residents who feel marginalized that their voices don't count. And at the same time, we can continue to look for the perfect model, but instead of digging in and starting the hard work of transformation. So I think we've heard from the community. I think it's our job now to act. We need to treat the matter of this Equity Board with the same urgency that we treated the Environmental Board. We need to stay true to the commitments we made a year ago when we accepted the mayor's police accountability, equity, and human services work plan. And through that document, we said to the community that things were going to change. So I support the idea of sending this forward now, not sending it back to the Human Services Commission, but sending it forward to the council for action at the next appropriate meeting. On the subject of stipends, I take a really inclusive look at stipends. I would like to offer stipends to all board and commission members because to me, equity should not be confined to a single board. My preference would be that we offer a fixed amount for each meeting attended and offer it without restriction to anyone who wants to request it. And then I would also ask that the request process be a confidential request so that that can be done privately. And it should also be made as easy as possible for people to do. I don't want any kind of process where people have to ask every time they attend a meeting to be reimbursed or to receive the stipend. I hope we would find something that would be very, very easy for people to access. So those are my comments. I would just reiterate that I think we have almost talked this to pieces, and that it is time for us to act. And I heard eloquent testimony to that tonight, and I agree with all of it. Let's move forward. Let's get this going. Let's get the hard work started. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember DiMichele. Next up is Councilmember Martz.
Thank you, Councilmember Hall. Well, documented issues on why we might need an equity board. You can obviously go with the big and talk about the vast and growing gap in prosperity, health, and safety faced by communities of color. But let me just focus on us sitting here, the City Council. So I'm in my 12th year on the City Council, and I've been lucky enough to serve with 17 people in those 12 years. And out of those 17, exactly one has been a person of color, my friend, State Representative Bill Ramos. And I know he's a person of color because he's a proud Mexican American and has told me about it. And I've been lucky enough to be friends with all 17 people, and so I know how they see themselves and how they see themselves as Americans. But people of color are underrepresented in the community conversation, and so that's as far as I need to look to say that we need an equity board. That's enough evidence for me. We got to do something different. I'm excited about this. I'm excited that it's moved expeditiously. I'm excited that it's focused on results. There are a couple of pieces of feedback on it. I think that I continue to have a concern about overlapping advisory roles. I'll just give an example. I could see where the Equity Board and the Human Services Commission could have differing views. I use my example of affordable housing, right? One group might want to have us have the housing plan focus more on low-income housing. The other might want to focus more on workforce housing. Those are substantially different policy directions to take. And, I would like to see an attempt at clarity I'm not sure I get the idea that equity affects everything, but I think as a practical matter, you're going to get a challenge if you're looking for two different boards or commissions to provide guidance on a particular subject. We know what DC does. We know what PPC does. We know what the environmental board is going to focus on. And so I do think that it will help, and it'll help have the equity board have more influence if it has specific areas that the council is looking to the board for guidance. I would also like to see an outreach to the East Asian and Southeast Asian communities, which are two of our largest communities of color in the city. Also very, very much underrepresented. So I would love to see that. And then finally, on the subject of the stipend, I absolutely agree with my fellow council member DiMichele. We should look to provide stipends where appropriate across our commissions and boards. It's hard. We are such an expensive city, and it's so hard for people to get by living in our city. And it seems particularly hard to then we're asking people to take time out of their evenings. And I think about my own mom, who's a single mom, running a record store, which is a super cool job. It pays almost nothing, or paid almost nothing. You can't run a record store anymore. And she just didn't get involved in community issues because she didn't have any time. And she was busy putting food on the table. So I think the stipend idea is grand. That concludes my comments. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Councilmember Martz. Next up, I had put Deputy Council President Ray has also provided some comments that he'd like read at tonight's meeting. So I will call up City Administrator Bob Kowitz to make those.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Hall. Again, Deputy Council President Ray was unable to be with the meeting this evening and asked that these comments be read into the record. First, he notes that there are a few inconsistent and ambiguous statements in the ordinance. One, may participate on select interview panels. It is not clear who may participate on select interview panels and how this is different from other community members participating on interview panels. And two, the board is the equity board in the ordinance and the equity oversight board in the staff report. So those were two statements, and Ms. Nurella, maybe at some appropriate point you can come back and address those. In addition, Deputy Council President Ray writes, these are not deal breakers, but leave me with the impression that crafting this ordinance has been done very quickly and has overly relied on ordinances that created other boards. The whereas clauses should focus on Issaquah, not the larger world, as I believe the focus of the equity board should be on Issaquah. The reference to George Floyd and the reference to the police accountability plan does not set the correct tone. I do think that the following whereas reflects the desires of the Issaquah community. Whereas City of Issaquah has expressed commitment to listening to a diverse range of opinions, stories, and perspectives, continuing the dialogue and sharing what we have heard and implementing change as a community. Done correctly, engaging the community in an equity discussion can be very powerful and move our community forward as a welcoming and inclusive place to live. Done incorrectly, this can be a divisive force in our community, undermining our stated goals. Before moving forward with this ordinance, we need to take the time to solicit community input and make sure that we implement a solution that will facilitate our city to become more inclusive, welcome, and equitable. I would request that the community be more actively engaged in the discussion before we finalize a solution, and this comes back to a future council study session. As you know, I will not be able to attend the study session tonight, and again, he asked that these thoughts be shared with the council. Thank you.
Thank you very much, City Administrator. Next on our list is Council Member Walsh.
Thank you, Councilmember Hall. This is Councilmember Walsh. I am just so heartened by having seen this go through the process and see how it has changed in response to the community. First of all, this was entirely a community-led conversation. This wasn't something that came from the city council and we went back to staff and we said, hey, here's what we want to do, put it in place, write up an agenda bill and bring it back to us. No, this was a 10-month-long process that came from, that initial conversation saying, we want to do something about this, but we want this to be community-led. And so we said, Human Services Commission, is this something you want to do? And then we said, wait, what is this? What would a commission or an attempt to address equity, diversity, and inclusion in the city look like? And so I really appreciate that starting at that ground level place and hearing the voices and then bringing it to council and us having questions, comments, concerns to see the difference between what was initially presented to us May 25th, which was 12 different focal areas, down to what we're seeing here in this draft agenda bill of 4 focal areas, suggests that the Human Services Commission took a deep look at that and said, we can't do it all. We're going to stay focused, and here's the areas that we think we can have an impact. And I very much appreciate that tighter scope. I think that's very responsive to the comments that were received. And it gives a sense that this is something that can be done. I also very much value the Human Services Commission and their review of human service needs and grants for our city. And there is no way that I would want this folded back into that as a group. I highly value their work, their professional work in that area as volunteers. And I think we as a community are better off with all of that going through a community board than coming just from staff. The wisdom of the crowd and the ability to have a public process is just absolutely essential. And we're blessed for having that in our community. I would also say we have had quite a bit of input, and anybody who says that we haven't had community input hasn't been participating or rewatching the community conversations or the commission meetings that have shown this. It's all been out in public. So I am quite comfortable with not waiting, acting on this, and really appreciating the tighter scope of that. I will also say to Councilmember Martz's comments about concerns about differing opinions between different boards, I hear you on that. And if we had a perfect world and we could, kind of have two separate areas, I think that would be great. But I think from my perspective, getting different opinions from multiple boards is fantastic. It gives us more to think about, more to talk about. I would rather have more opinions coming forward. I think other examples of this, Title 18. Title 18 is going to go through several different boards. And the opinions that are going to come out of PPC versus the environmental board versus transportation and DC are all going to be different. And they're all valuable commentary and experiences that we need to gather together. And so I have no problem with it being different opinions for a same situation. In fact, I value having the community conversations on that. And then I would just say thank you to the staff and the commissioners who have put so much work into this. I was a PPC member before this, and so I absolutely know the amount of time that this takes and energy from a volunteer point. And then I'll just summarize up on stipends. I would like it to be available to all boards, but I would really recognize that many of our community members who are already involved in this do not need the help of stipends. And so to save taxpayer dollars and all of that, I would prefer it to be opt-in and not opt-out. I do appreciate that it should be confidential and easy and all of that, but I don't want to downplay the differences between somebody who needs help of a stipend and somebody who doesn't. And I don't want to just offer that as a blanket. That seems pretty disrespectful to somebody who actually needs that help. And so I hope we take that into account. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Walsh. And before we move on to Council President Hunt real quick, if I could just ask Jillian to stop sharing the screen. I think we're good on that for the discussion now. And next up is Council President Hunt.
Thank you. This is Council President Hunt. Councilmember DeMichelle, I think, summarized where we are in this process really well. I am supportive of moving ahead. Earlier, we heard from Commissioner Chodo about asking us to recognize the need for this board. And I think recognizing that need is really the least we can do at this point. I think we need to take action. I think the time to act is now. And I would like to see this come back to us in a form where we can adopt it. I did want to mention a few other things that haven't been mentioned previously in response to Council Deputy President Ray's suggestion that we might remove the whereas clause that references the death of George Floyd and also the Police Accountability, Equity, and Human Services Action Plan. I would not support removing that. I think that whereas clause and the other whereas clauses that are in the ordinance do set the context well for why we are establishing the board. And I think that's the purposes of the whereas clause, to establish that context. So I support including them as they appear currently in the draft. And I really think we are ready to move this forward for council to adopt it. The last thing, let's see. Oh, I also wanted to note that one of the last whereas clauses in the ordinance, I think, summarizes really well. Says the city would benefit from the knowledge and expertise of diverse community in Issaquah, including representatives of the Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. And so I think we would benefit from this, and we should benefit from this expertise and move forward as soon as possible. The next thing I would want to quickly say is that regarding the stipend, I do support expanding this to other commissions. I think for people that are at certain points in their life, it could be beneficial and we could get different perspectives that way. Because of my having served on a commission with little kids, I think, for me, childcare comes to mind. I do think it should be easy to access. The one thing I would consider maybe a little bit differently is that this is the first time that we are doing this for the city. We do have a lot of commissions, but this is the first time we're implementing this or considering implementing this new process. And so I think there may be a benefit to doing this as a pilot for the equity board first, and then learning from that, learning about the best possible ways to apply this as a program, just operationalizing it and see how it goes. The other benefit of doing it first for that group is that we do commission recruitment in the spring. So that would be around April of next year. So if this commission is recruiting earlier, then we could have some lessons learned and then apply that to the recruitment for the commissions in the spring. Because I do think people, when they're considering volunteering, it would be helpful to know if this is available, and then they can consider getting involved. So I think that's really the time where this would be most beneficial for engagement. So that would be my one consideration. I do support expanding stipends to the other commissions, but I think maybe a pilot would benefit us for lessons learned. That's it. Let's go forward with this. Thanks.
And thank you, Council President Hunt. Are there any other comments that council members would like to make? I'll make a few comments now, but if you have some second comments you'd like to bring up, feel free to put that in the chat. I just really quickly wanted to run through some of the powerful statements we heard during public comment today about how supporting and having an equity board would help promote economic and social benefit and broaden diverse spaces within the city to help us break out of groupthink, which I would think should be one of our number one priorities as an all-white council. I heard nothing happens about us without us. I love that. I've always loved that. Supportive policies that ensure safety and respect for people of color and communities of color, telling us that this is what they would like to see come next. People of color are still waiting for action, excited and optimistic for what the equity board could bring to the city. The nuances of language are important, and making sure it's called equity board is important because of the perspective and how it signifies a permanent solution. Let's see. Everyone else had great comments, and I ditto all of you. I think that, yes, I would like to see us move forward and have this brought back to us at a future council meeting for final adoption in its current form. I think I agree with Council President Hunt with the stipend program starting with a pilot for the equity board. That way we have kind of measurable objectives. It's a clean slate, a brand new board, and we're coming in and seeing, okay, number one, is this helping us meet our objectives of having a more diverse pool of candidates and commissioners and board members involved in the city, and then also how many people are using it and often, and what is the cost looking like, and then we can use that to help paint the picture of, well, what actually do we need to do. Lessons learned was a good phrase. I'll just say lessons learned. Thanks, Vicky. And those are my comments. Now, I think I'll just quickly summarize some of the comments that we heard from everyone, and then City Administrator Bob Quitz, I'll go to you to make sure you had everything you needed. So, council comments, we heard first and foremost incredible work by city staff, by human services commissioners, by community members. Everyone here very clearly values. Everyone on council very clearly values your passion, your perspective, your professionalism, and all this work. So thank you. With regard to the equity board ordinance, we heard largely supportive of moving forward now and returning for adoption at a future meeting in the ordinance's current forms, whereas clauses and all. Just reiterating that this was a very community-driven, community-led conversation with lots of community input, ensuring that outreach to underrepresented communities in Issaquah is a crucial role to this board. And then we also heard some concerns. One, concerns with overlapping advisory roles with regard to our boards and commissions, and then from another council member interested in changing and refocusing the whereas statements and potentially additional community input. And then for the stipend, pretty much the majority we heard a need-based opt-in stipends available to all board and commission members, finding a way to make sure that that's confidential, and then just a few of us saying maybe start with a pilot program and then go from there. So City Administrator Bob Quitz, does that capture everything? Council members, please raise your hand if I missed any point that you would like documented.
Thank you, Councilmember Hall. I think it does. We will come back with an ordinance for council action, likely on August the 2nd. I think on the stipends, we appreciate very much the feedback. Let us go back to the work table to start drafting some language. I think we do want to see what some of our neighbor communities, what other communities around the country are doing regarding stipends, look for systems that would have the opt-in feature. So give us a little bit of time. We'll probably be able to come back with a draft plan for the council to discuss probably at a study session in September. So if that all works, let me also take this opportunity to thank the commissioners once again, Monica Negrilla, our human services manager. As I think you all know, Monica came to us thinking she was just going to focus on the Human Services Commission, worry about their grant process, and was going to be very happy doing that. And then the last year, we've turned her professional life upside down and have asked her to do lots more. And I just want to take this opportunity really to thank Monica for her leadership over the last year. She has transformed how the city government deals with the issues of human services. I think we have made great leaps and bounds at the mayor and the city council's direction. Monica's gotten it done, and very much appreciate not only her advocacy for what the council and the mayor want, but her advocacy on behalf of our residents and making sure that their needs and desires are articulated in a way that can be discussed and acted upon by the council. So, Monica, really on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for your work.
Thank you very much. I'm so humbled and honored to work with you and the rest of the team, and with my director, Jeff, and with the commissioners, of course, and staff. So just very grateful for everyone. Thank you.
And to Commissioner Choto and Brown, thanks for sticking around for us for so long. Actually, are you sticking around for the next item with us too? Okay, well, thanks for continuing to stick around with us. I would like to, before we move on to the next agenda item, I'd like to suggest to council that maybe we take a 5-minute bio break. I'm seeing nods. All right, great. Clerk Geezer, then we're going to take a 5-minute break at 8:34. Let's see everyone back here at 8:39. Clerk Geezer? Yeah.
Yes.
All right, Travis, giving you 10 seconds now. Hello and welcome back to the July 13th City Council study session. We've just gotten back from a break and now we're going to move into our next item, which is ID 0927, Equity Framework Discussion. And before I pass it off to Stephanie Johnson, I just wanted to quickly say to the council members, this is going to be, this is a long discussion and it by no means needs to happen all in one night and this evening. I've had a quick discussion with the city administrator and we think it might be a good idea to set stop time on this and realizing we can always come back at another time. So do we think maybe 10 p.m. as a stop? What do council members think? I'll look for nods or angry typings in the chat. Okay, and I think we're going to do that. All right, so we'll pass it off to City Administrator Bobkowitz and city staff to take us off with the presentation. Thank you very much.
And I will pass it back to Stephanie.
Good evening, Council, Equity Team, and others on the call tonight. I'm excited about the opportunity to co-facilitate tonight's study session. What better a topic than that of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and building a framework and how we build better together. So I'm excited about that opportunity. Laura Knox, our senior HR analyst, is going to control our slide deck tonight. So I will ask her to pull that up. Looks like that's coming up, so thank you. Give her a second here. There we go. So if you could advance, Lauren, we're here tonight to seek council input on equity framework options and proposed next steps. And I would just like to remind all joining us tonight on what an equity framework is. It's a tool utilized to analyze proposed policies, programs, and budgetary decisions to ensure, as we make those decisions, that they do not have unintended adverse consequences on marginalized groups. Both the City Council and our internal equity team participated in equity framework training with Benita Horn both in 2020 and 2021. And we're looking to move the conversation along post-training. Lauren, could you advance, please? Quickly through the agenda tonight, we're going to do some introductions. We're going to look at the work that the equity team has been doing. And then the bulk of our time this evening, we hope to spend talking about a couple framework options. And then we'll lead that into discussion and next steps. My first introduction tonight is my co-facilitator, Channon Kelly Ray. Channon is not exactly a stranger to the City Council. You may recall she was a presenter with Police Chief Scott Beerbaum in May regarding a school resource officer discussion. While Benita Horn, who previously provided council training, was willing to help us with a couple of baseline council trainings, we knew in parallel we needed to seek a consultant who could help us design and lead equity assessments to identify our growth potential in the city. As such, in 2020, we did an RFP search for diversity, equity, and inclusion consultants to help us guide our equity initiatives, and that led us to executing a contract with Channon. Much of the work that Channon has been doing for us is along deconstructing our biases training for all city staff, which is well underway. You'll hear about that shortly in the agenda tonight. But we're able to call upon her expertise for other topic areas. We thought tonight would be a great opportunity to introduce Channon more formally to the council to help facilitate the equity framework discussion. Channon is a diversity executive, expert consultant, and professional executive coach. And as you can see on the slide deck here, committed to the work that we have started to embark upon. So I'm excited for you to get to have some additional interaction with Channon tonight. Also joining us tonight is members of our internal equity team. I know logistically with video and slide deck, I'm not able to see exactly who's all on the call at this time, but I do want to run down quickly the list here because these are staff who volunteered to serve on this internal team with a passion for this work. It's in addition to their everyday other responsibilities. And I might add that this is absolutely our most represented committee in the city internally. I think that speaks volume in itself. So Brian Burnson is a mechanic with the city. Brian Burnson is our recreation manager. Megan Curtis Murphy, our senior sustainability coordinator. Jen Davis Hayes, our economic development manager. Amy Dukes, our arts program administrator. Matt Ellis, our senior engineer. Brian Husmillo is an environmental and regulatory program coordinator. Laura Johnson, an administrative specialist in our public works department. Myself as the HR director. Laura Knox, the senior HR analyst running our slide deck for us tonight. Holly Lucht, our police support services manager. Dale Markey Crimp, our new management analyst to the city. Dan Martinez, an associate planner. Autumn Monahan, the assistant to the city administrator. Monica Negrilla, our human services manager, who was on the agenda earlier tonight. Stephen Padua, senior transportation planner, and Jeff Watling, our parks and community services director. You'll see this is a big group. I also want to note, it's a cross section of representatives of all throughout our organization. So that's, really exciting to see the commitment that we have from this team for this work. Next slide, please. So what we'd like to do is a quick review for council tonight of what we've been up to as an equity team, the actions that we've achieved so far and are continuing the conversation around. Previous council updates, we've shared that we've split our equity team into 3 focus area groups. The first being recruiting. We also have training and engagement. So I'm going to start off by telling you kind of what we've been up to in the recruitment realm. When we talk about data gathering, one of the things that our internal recruitment subcommittee has been working on is looking at our applicant tracking system, NeoGov. We've been re-implementing features within our applicant tracking system to help us gather metrics that will help us inform how we are attracting diverse applicants. We're looking at things, are we attracting them? Where are we losing them in the process? Our ability to see really the entire recruitment life cycle from application to hire and how we can improve upon those measures. Similarly, we've set up our human resources information system to view employee demographics and how these relationships compare. We're also doing similar work with our board and commissions, which is a bullet here I'll address on the slide. I'd be also remiss if I didn't address a topic area we've also discussed, not only how we recruit, but how do we retain these individuals? We're able to understand all these questions with this data gathering that we're doing. Another item that we've worked on is adding an equity statement to all of our job postings when we're looking for candidates to fill vacant positions. I won't read the entire equity statement, but I think it's well deserved to say that, part of our statement says that the city of Issaquah strives to be a diverse workforce that is representative of the community we serve. We believe diversity and inclusion among our teammates is critical to the success of our city operations. We've posted that on all our job announcements so far this year after the team came up with our statement. We've also embedded equity interview questions into each of our recruitment processes. We've created a bank of questions as Human Resources is working with department managers on filling positions and creating questions for those interview processes. We've made it a requirement to embed some kind of equity interview question in our process. Examples of that could be, tell us how you've you've worked with people to create or foster equity in the workplace or community? Or what actions have you taken either professionally or personally to create a welcoming environment so everyone feels included? So that's exciting to see, you know, some quick wins in a short amount of time, and how we advertise for jobs and how we are interviewing for individuals as well. We're also looking at job advertising. How are we casting our nets? Are we casting them far and wide enough? How can we improve upon that? You know, a lot of times we go to professional organizations to post for positions, but where are we not seeing candidates, and where do we need to tap into? And so that's another area that this team has been working on. I mentioned board and commission recruitment. You know, we don't just recruit for city internal positions, but we also recruit for board and commission members. This process is led by our city clerk's office, and we've been partnering with them to gather metrics like we have for the other city staff positions. We've also looked at, you know, as we're gathering that data or those metrics, how can we use this to ensure the right voices are at the table for all the different work that our boards and commissions do in the city. So next, I'm going to hand it over to Lauren and ask her to talk about what the equity team has been working on for training.
Good evening, council members. This is probably an item that's relatively familiar to you, as council training was a part of this as well. As you know, we've done 2 trainings with council with Benita Horn. We've also done implemented a staff training program. The first piece of that was some online equity trainings through a vendor that, you know, were just kind of to move the ball forward while we were selecting a consultant for a larger training. We did select that consultant, who's Shannon, who's here with us this evening, and she is in the process of training all of our staff on deconstructing our bias, which we expect that to be completed by the end of August. Boards and commissions, we have begun that process. There's been a couple of boards that have received trainings from Benita Horn or others, and that's something that we intend to continue this year and next year.
So I want to check, and maybe Tisha, you could help me. Is Autumn on the call? I'm not able to see.
Hi, Stephanie. Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Autumn is our assistant to the city administrator, and Autumn's going to walk us through the items that our engagement team has been working on.
Good evening, council members. Thank you for the time tonight to talk through some of our actions as an equity team. Our subcommittee around engagement has focused on several key areas, including hosting several cultural conversations. Many have happened remotely in the past year. We've added more website resources to the city's website around equity. And as you heard earlier tonight, there's been a significant amount of community engagement around equity happening throughout our community. We have also implemented a new language line that provides a translation service to those who call City Hall or call any of our mainline numbers for service. And that is something that we've just implemented in the past few months, and it's already been used by some customers. And we are starting to translate some of our printed materials in both Spanish and Chinese. And so that's been a goal of ours in 2021, is to do that for anything that is printed and provided to our community. We're also working to update our holiday and event calendars, both internally for our staff to be aware of as we're working on scheduling, and then also posting those publicly on our city's website. And then we're also working to update our engagement toolkit so that it has a bit of an equity lens. And so more to come on that as we continue work around that area.
Thank you, Autumn. So, you know, I am really proud of the work that this team has been able to achieve thus far. I'm a firm believer, and we've done quite a bit in a relatively short amount of time, but there's more work to be done. And that leads us to the next area of our focus tonight, and that's building an equity framework that we can use in all of our policy decisions and processes going forward. So earlier this evening, I gave an introduction to Channon Kelly Ray, and I would like to turn it over to Channon to help us walk through some samples of equity framework options. I think we're going to even maybe pilot one of those a little bit tonight, and then talk about what we learn as a result.
And Shannon, I'm so sorry. This is Councilmember Hall. Do you mind if I ask a quick question before we move into the equity framework? Of Stephanie and Lauren with regard to kind of what we've done so far. Sorry to interrupt. I could feel we were on a roll there, but I have a quick question with regard to boards and commissions, training for boards and commissions. I'm just curious if any of the boards or commissions that have either gotten, well, one, for those who may have gotten some sort of equity training, has it been more kind of basic fundamentals in terms of bias and equity, or are there plans to have more focused equity trainings? Like I could see like the Transportation Advisory Board having one on like historical inequity when it comes to transportation planning policy, or another one on redlining for another committee or something like that. So if you could clear that up, that would be great.
Lauren, do you want to take that one? I know you've partnered with Stephen Padua, our transportation planner, and work with that board in particularly. Also, Monica, maybe you could address Councilmember Hall's question.
Yeah, Councilmember Hall, thank you for the question. This is Lauren. Yeah, so far with boards and commissions trainings, we've been sort of partnering with staff liaisons as they're kind of able and in a good place to give those trainings to the boards. So Monica is a great example. She did that with the Human Services Commission. That was a really similar training to what council received last year with Benita. I think it was almost the same training, just a shortened version. And same with a couple of other commissions that I'm kind of blanking on right now. With the Transportation Advisory Board in particular, Stephen did develop some more specific materials and conversation in partnership with Benita for that board. And I can't speak to the exact details, but I know that, you know, he was trying to bring out some materials around, you know, transportation policy in particular. We've kind of focused on staff training and getting that implemented. And now that we have that rolling a little bit, we're in more of a position to turn our focus a little bit more to boards and commissions and coming up with more of a program there. But I just wanted to at least indicate that the work is kind of on the way, and that's something on our work plan.
Thank you very much. Sorry to interject in there.
No problem. Okay, Channon, you are up next. Hello.
Thank you so much. Thank you for allowing me to address you, council, and our distinguished members and guests and staff. So I wanted to walk through essentially what those two equity framework options look like and what they mean. The first model is a step model, or more specifically, what it describes is a structural development process to build a framework for accomplishing a deliverable. The second, or the postcard model, describes really what is a bench card process to assess both the approach of individual or collective assessment of the stages, the insights, the data, or the information that would be considered by the council, by the body, or by leaders or decision making. And really, one process is embedded within the other. Specifically, the step model process would articulate step by step what you would go through in order to accomplish an ends to a means to an end. But the postcard model embedded within the step model is really how you look at the information in front of you. And so the bench card demands that really every step is done thoughtfully, deliberately, and intentionally to ensure the elimination of disparate impacts. And so that would be embedded within the step model process. Slide. And so what you see in front of you is based on the Seattle Race and Social Justice Initiative as a STEP model. So it begins with step 1, setting outcomes. Step 2, involving stakeholders and analyzing data. Step 3, determine the benefit and or the burden. Step 4, advancing opportunity or minimizing harm. Step 5, evaluate, raise racial awareness, and be accountable. And step 6 is reporting back. And so what you see in this model is the design of a process to accomplish a deliverable, but in designing the process, what it doesn't do is have individuals or the collective body break down each of those steps to reflect on whether or not there is disparate impact at any part of that process through either the input data that is both qualitative or quantitative, and it doesn't have the individual players or collective body assess for their own biases that may come as part of that process. And then that's where the postcard or benchmark process will be embedded within that model. Slide. Another example in front of you is the rent and step model. And so again, this is a process to create effectively a step-by-step model to again get to a deliverable. So setting outcomes, involving stakeholders, gathering and analyzing data, take action, evaluate outcomes, and report back to stakeholders. So this is really, how do you get from point A to point B, and what are those steps in the process? So it's essentially a list that you check that represents best practices to get to a deliverable or end result. Slide. And then finally, there is the Portland STEP model process. So from the Office of Equity and Human Rights for the based on the Racial Equity Toolkit, again, this is encompassing in terms of benchmarking at least. This encompasses or presents to you what it looks like to create a list, to go through the list that represents best practices to get to an output goal. So again, setting racial equity goals, refining outcomes and developing equitable strategies, implementing changes, and then evaluating report back. So again, a step-by-step process to get to a deliverable. Slide. Now, what you have in front of you is essentially the postcard or the bench card process. And so what this does very differently is it looks at steps, but now what it does is it has you do a little bit of self-reflection, group reflection, and think about the impacts of each of those steps in your decision-making process. So what it does is post these questions, and you have an example from Portland's Urban League where it says, briefly describe the proposed action policy, the policy, program, planning, budget, etc. decision at the desired results. Who are the racial and ethnic groups affected by this action? How will each group be affected? What are the racial disparities related to this project? How will you track programs towards progress of disparity? So all of a sudden, now it's not at the 30,000 foot view. Now it wants you to get into the weeds to think about the impacts of your decision making, to think about biases that you may bring into the process, to think about either implicit or explicit biases by any stakeholder, so that you're very deliberate and intentional to break down the process and think about all of those things embedded within the process that may affect an eventual outcome. Also an example, how does this proposed project promote racial inclusive collaboration and civic engagement? Is there community support for or opposition to the proposal, and why? So all of a sudden you have to ask and answer these questions. It begs for you to engage the community and then re-engage the community. Think about who's at the table and who's missing. And, you know, based on a lot of the feedback from earlier today, this gets to what those increasing concerns were that were expressed today. How do we make sure that we're thinking about disproportionality and disparate impact? How do we ensure that we've touched and reached all of those corners of the community? And this is not just a conversation about race in terms of equity, it's about disproportional impact for any marginalized community. So neurodiverse, sensory diverse, physical diversity, language, ethnicity, race, gender identity, sexual orientation, and all of those things where people may experience disparity. How does this proposed action affect systemic changes or address institutional racism or bias? And what is your method for tracking progress. How does this proposed project support workforce equity and or contracting equity? And finally, are there any unintended consequences for certain populations and or communities? Are there strategies to mitigate any negative impacts? Slide. And so what I've offered for the council to consider is then, what are some questions that the city of Issaquah, whether it's the council or the executive leadership team or any decision makers or boards and commissions, what are those questions that we ask as part of our process to make sure that we're trying to get at the root causes, to get at unintended consequence, or to make sure that no voice is left behind? You know, the saying is, build nothing for them without them. Build nothing for them without them. And this causes us to stop and self-reflect as individuals, which is critically important, but also equally important, it begs us to talk about these things as a body, as a governing body, as a deciding body of folks who are adjudicating some really important decisions impacting all of the community. And so the questions that I have, and there's 10 questions, are the following. So thinking as someone on the city council, for example, have I made any assumptions about the cultural identity, genders, abilities, identities, and or background of those impacted by my decision? What is my understanding of the group or groups being impacted by my decision? Are there unique cultural circumstances that I should consider? How is my decision going to specifically impact marginalized people? Have I considered how to mitigate the harmful results? How has the council's past contact and involvement with marginalized stakeholder communities influenced, or how might it influence my decision-making process and findings? What evidence has supported every conclusion I've drawn? And how have I challenged unsupported assumptions? Slide. How am I convinced that reasonable efforts have been made in an individualized way to match the needs of the entire community, particularly marginalized populations? And this is especially important when you look at the composition of the community and you think, because the concern is always when you are a small representative population within sometimes a homogeneous whole, how can you ensure that you center the experience that, and you've heard it today where you've talked about the desire for change over hundreds of years, but you have a small voice that is not centered, where those voices are not at the table and they cannot affect change. And you wanted to really meet the needs of all community members, but now you have to think about the individualized small representative sample, and for Issaquah that is a growing representative sample, but how do you center those voices? Have we heard from disparately impacted communities before we make any final determinations or decisions? Is my own personal experience, culture, and or background preventing me from understanding and taking the cultural issues of marginalized stakeholders into account in deciding what issues exist for those disparately impacted? Have we sacrificed the experience of marginalized people for the comfort and safety of those holding privilege, the majority population, stakeholders not negatively impacted? And finally, are we giving full credibility to those who are sharing concerns, or even though their numbers might be small or quiet in our community? So when you think about everything that you've listened to tonight, and if you go through that list of self-reflective questions for community decision-making, those are the things that will help you hopefully get to some easier answer when you hold up the values of this council and this community against the decision-making that you make. This causes us to be very deliberate and intentional to then reflect. Slide. Before I go on, I wanted to make sure that I stopped and gave the council an opportunity to ask me any qualifying questions, any questions that might provide additional clarity before I go on into this more abbreviated model.
And this is Councilmember Hall. I'm not seeing anyone lining up in chat, but I'll take a look for another minute or so. But in the meantime, I guess feel free to go on.
And so what you saw previous was a longer process, a longer set of questions for that individual and collective reflection. But then there is this shorter model, this abbreviated model that really kind of takes it back up to the 30,000-foot view and asks, so if you only have 3 questions that you could pose to ask and answer when making a decision, what are the, and I want to extend this and say more than just racial equity impacts, but what are the disproportional impacts of a particular decision? Who will benefit or be burdened by that particular decision? And finally, are there strategies to mitigate unintended consequences? So who's being hurt or harmed? How can we make sure that the benefit or burden of this particular decision doesn't fall with one group as opposed to the other, that we can meet the needs of all? And what can we do to be very deliberate and intentional to address unintended consequences? And so the shorter model really depends on folks showing up at the table and knowing what those longer form questions are and knowing to go through those things. The shorter list is really kind of the high level reminder to go through at least a foundation of these 3 particular areas. Slide. And so what I wanted to do tonight was not look at the decisions that you've adjudicated as a council, but give you really a case study or an example from outside the area from a completely different time, that if we use those models, both that short form question or the longer form question in the postcard model or the bench card process, if we apply those same questions to this example of a case study from the city of Newport Beach as they consider the criteria for a public art project, if we apply those same methodologies of assessment, how might this council come to certain decisions, or what stands out to you? What are the things that might cause you to reflect, go back, seek more information, or even sometimes think more critically on an issue than you might have? And so this is a case study, and I'm going to give you a side-by-side of what some of those questions look like, but really the following criteria, and this is word for word from the city of Newport Beach, in terms of other considerations. The following criteria shall be considered prior to approval of public art project or authorization of an expenditure of the Public Art and Cultural Facilities Fund. Number 1, the aesthetic concept, quality, scale, and form of the work of art and its appropriateness for the site. Other considerations are number 2, a site that is easily visible and or accessible to the general public. 3, the experience, skill, and ability of the artist to produce the work of art. Number 4, the proper medium for the work of art, considering durability against vandalism, theft and weather, and the safety of the viewer. Number 5, the cost for the city to acquire, install, insure, and maintain the work of art. Number 6, the degree to which the facility will provide cultural enrichment, historical understanding, educational value, or facilitate performance art. 7, the value of the proposed facility in the economic, cultural, or neighborhood revitalization of the city and the particular neighborhood of the proposed facility. And then finally, the value of the improvement in enhancing Newport Beach as an arts and or cultural destination. So that is the case study. So that is what they considered in terms of as a part of the expenditure for Public Art and Cultural Facilities Fund. So slide, what I want to do is have you look at that abbreviated list. So when you think about these questions and you look at what's in front of you in terms of a recommendation for policy, if you ask yourselves, and I'm going to invite this of both the equity team and the council, I want all of you to weigh in. So as you adjudicate this policy consideration in front of you, and we go through those questions, I want to know what stands out. What would you call out? What are you missing? What are some other things that we might think of in terms of consideration that either are stated here or those things that they've not considered that aren't stated that you might call out? So what are the racial or just disparate equity impacts of this particular decision? What do you think those disparate impacts are for this decision? Who do you think might be benefited or burdened by this particular policy? Are there strategies to mitigate unintended consequences? So what stands out to you? What do you see here that kind of raises the ire, or what do you think that's missing that should be considered? What questions are being asked, but what questions do you think aren't being asked in consideration of a policy like this? Remember, to meet the needs of all of the community. What does art look like for all of the community? What does participation look like for all of the community? Accessibility for all of the community, cost and benefit for all of the community. So I want to stop talking and I want you to look at this and reflect and then weigh in.
And it looks like we already have a few comments lined up. Shannon, totally up to you since you're facilitating. Would you like to facilitate folks wanting to comment, or would you like me to run that
I would like
in the chat? Okay.
I would like for you to run that chat. Thank you.
Sounds good. Then we'll start with Councilmember DiMichele.
Okay, I don't know exactly how to express this, but whenever you buy a piece of art, the funding goes to a person or a community, and there's nothing in here about supporting artists of color. There's nothing in here about supporting or prioritizing communities that produce great art, but often don't get paid for the work that they do. That's a long comment. I don't know exactly how to put that in concise, but that would be the point. Yeah.
Councilmember DiMichele, point excellently made. So there is no one way to express that, but your call out is spot on. That is exactly the direction I think that the comment should go. Anyone else? Thank you for that. What else comes up to your mind's eye, everyone else?
And it looks like Council President Hunt.
Thank you. This is Council President Hunt. One thing that I was thinking about with this, which might be unintended consequences, that it doesn't really look at where there isn't art currently or what neighborhoods might not have art. And so when I think about like the value of improvement and enhancing, there might be a site that already has a lot of art, and so you might be enhancing that site, but this doesn't seem to look for or account for the fact that there might be differences in the amount of public art in different neighborhoods, for example.
Thank you so much, Council President. And that is an excellent call out as well, because what tends to happen disproportionately is, to both points, there is a divestment or there is an underinvestment in certain communities. There is an overinvestment in certain areas. And so in order to provide for economic relief, input in broader participation, especially in terms of investing in marginalized or underrepresented community, or making sure that all communities have the opportunity to experience the installation of art and the investment, it is important to do an assessment, a needs assessment, to look at where art exists and where it doesn't, and how we share that artwork and that wealth.
Next up is Councilmember Martz.
Thank you, Councilmember Hall. I noticed the word quality in number 1 and the word skill and ability in number 3, and I asked, according to whom? And if you have whoever runs things, if they're deciding what art qualifies as having quality or the skill and ability of the artist, you're going to get, if you ask the same people, you're going to get the same results. And so whoever is running things is going to determine the art, and you're going to get art that reflects the people who run things, which is not to the benefit of the whole community.
Exactly. Again, another great call out. because art is subjective. And when we look at the traditional canon of art and the aesthetic, it is very heavily weighted to very particular points in time in terms of the development of art history. It leans very heavily Western European aesthetic, and it leans very heavily on certain modalities or certain models or certain deliverables of art. So it doesn't look at art forms or methods of art or styles of art, and then it assumes on a very particular kind of art. It doesn't assume music. It doesn't assume dance. It doesn't assume outside of sculpture, maybe graffiti art and other forms of artistic expression. So excellent call out again. Thank you so much for that.
And Councilmember Walsh has a comment.
Thank you. Yeah, I was going a similar area to Councilmember Martz and noting in number 1 the appropriateness for the site, which that terminology just suggests that one person or one group of people can make a judgment about what is appropriate and not consult a marginalized group in a particular area.
Good. Thank you for that. Another excellent call out. Again, whenever you look for those dog whistles, that language that point to disparity and disparate outcomes expressly or explicitly, something like appropriateness will determine that there is an arbiter of what is appropriate, and that is not an inclusive arbiter, and then there are the folks who are inheriting that decision making. And that is really part and parcel of centering long-term historic patterns of privilege and power, and that does not leave something open for what is not considered to be appropriate. And that generally is folks who are marginalized being left behind effectively. And so I want for us to then, I want for us to then go to that longer set of questions. So now, every time you make a decision, as you look at policies, if you have a note card and these are the questions in front of you, that this is the lens through which you make all of these decisions, whether it's art or planning or infrastructure development, any decision making, whether you're a council, the boards and commissions, or even decision makers within city leadership. So now let's look at that same recommendation of policy, and let's dig deeper into those questions, the 10 questions that we've put together to be held by the city of Issaquah. Have I made any assumptions about the cultural identity, genders, abilities, identities, and or background of those impacted by my decision where this policy is concerned? What is my understanding of the groups being impacted by my decision or our decision? Are there unique cultural circumstances that I should consider? Now, when you think about unique cultural circumstances that you can consider, where might you apply that question even in this policy? How is my decision going to specifically impact marginalized people? Have we considered how to mitigate harmful results? So what might we do to change what's written so that we can be very intentional to mitigate any harmful result of this policy or decision making? How might we add subsections, beef it up, change the language, change the direction, or make sure that it's inclusive to meet the needs of all of the community? How has the council's past contact and involvement with marginalized stakeholder communities influence, or how might it influence my decision-making process or our findings? And what evidence has supported every conclusion that I've drawn? And how have I challenged unsupported assumptions? So I want for us to look at those questions, and really, you've kind of called a lot of this out already. You've thought about those negative consequences. You've thought about how different groups within the community and population might be impacted. You've thought about what art forms may exist in some communities, what is considered appropriate, what is valuable, what would be a value add to the community, or how we might engage. So those are things that you thought of. But see, you all show up And you're much further along than some other councils. You've already thought about those disparate impacts. You know the history of disparity in different communities and how we have to center some of those voices. So we don't have to think of this as a problem waiting to happen. These are problems that exist. What we want to do is think about how do we make sure that we don't continue to recycle and have a repetition of what has happened for hundreds of years. Slide. And then finally, those other 5 questions. How am I convinced that reasonable efforts have been made in an individualized way to match the needs of the entire community, particular marginalized populations, as we consider this policy? Have we heard from disparately impacted communities before we make any final determinations or decisions? So what has the deliberate and intentional outreach and engagement look like so that when we talk about art, we can have a broad definition of art? When we talk about investment and selection and criteria and who the decision makers are, that it's an inclusive body like a council or a board that can help us make these decisions and review these processes. Is my own personal experience, culture, and or background preventing me from really understanding and taking the cultural issues of marginalized stakeholders into account in deciding what issues exist for those disparately impacted? Have we sacrificed the experience of marginalized people for the comfort and safety of those holding privilege, especially in art? The majority population, stakeholders, and those people not negatively impacted. And then finally, are we giving full credibility to those who show up that are quiet voices, that are voices not at the table or voices that come in small numbers? Are we giving full credibility to those who are sharing their concerns, even though their numbers might be small or quiet in our community and before this council? So then think about what you deliberated tonight. Think about this policy. And I want to know then, what else do you see in this recommendation of policy before you as part of the case study? And then what else is missing? Is there another process that you need to see engaged so that you feel like you have all of the information that you need to make a decision? What else would you suggest that, for example, if this were the city managers and the administrator's office, if this was human services or an arts commission, what would you need for them to tell you happened before you could credibly and comfortably make a decision? What else is missing for you? And then I invite again, both the council and the the employee equity committee. Let me know what's missing for you or what stands out now.
This is Councilmember Hall. While I wait to see if anyone has any comments, I thought I might jump in right now too. I feel like a lot of these questions have to do with, are you actively engaging stakeholders? And that is completely missing from this policy here. So to me, that would be a obvious number 9 to add to the list, or even just bump it up to 1 or something.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Anyone else?
Yeah, Council President Hunt.
Thank you. I was thinking about the question having to do with the council's past engagement and past relationship with communities. And so I think one thing that is missing is maybe a consideration of the history of how the policy has been implemented in the past. So you might need to build trust with those communities if they haven't been engaged and this policy has been implemented without their engagement, rather than just starting and getting engagement straight away. So there might need to be that, but to know how to best do that, I think you would have to have an understanding of the history. So I think that's missing for me.
Absolutely. To be able to demonstrate that we've listened and learned and then are willing to act based on that information. Good call out.
Councilmember DiMichele.
Just a comment that I'm doing a lot of organizational work right now, and I want one of these postcards. So I think, Shannon, do you want to comment on, is this an actual postcard? Is this something that people would actually have in their hands? Is that how it would be used? And maybe you could just talk about how it would actually be applied as people are working through different policies. But if you want to print some of these up for me, I'd be glad to have them.
You know, and what you suggest, Councilmember DiMichele, is exactly what we're hoping to do. To be able to print these on a card and make them available to you and anybody that has to make a decision where the community will be impacted, or a body of employees will be impacted, or some group would be impacted, but to be very deliberate and intentional. And this is based on, in terms of benchmarking, the work done by many organizations, not the least of which is the National Council of Juvenile Family Court Judges. You know, when I work with that body, one of the things that happened in terms of model courts, and we were looking at disproportionality in child welfare, it was tools like this that proved conclusively that disproportionality could be positively impacted by asking these questions and going through these questions, to be very deliberate and intentional during the adjudication or decision-making process, to look at who's around the table, who's impacted, who's affected, and what we bring to both the process and the decision-making, and whose voices are missing, and how we make sure that you bring those voices to the table to consider that. So this tool was designed and developed for you, and for the council and for the city. So you absolutely can have access to this as a tool. So talk to Wally and see if he can't put these on a card and print them up with the city's logo, and then pass them out across the community.
And next up is Councilmember Walsh, followed by Parks and Community Services Director Watling.
Thanks. This is Councilmember Walsh. One of the things that I was thinking about in going through those questions was, what does this policy doesn't do anything to try and mitigate any harm. And so whether you look at that from a, quote unquote affirmative action concept that says a certain percentage should be from unknown artists or marginalized groups, or checking to see what percentage of art is in certain neighborhoods and adjusting the funding toward that idea. But that concept of unintended consequences and mitigation in a policy, I think, is important and certainly missing here.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Councilmember Walsh. That's a great call out. And especially with regard to reference to look at this through a lens of affirmative action. And that terminology was really born of President Johnson during a speech at a historically Black college, where he said, it's not enough that we're trying to do the right thing. We have to be affirmative in our approach and in our action. We have to be very deliberate and intentional in this approach. So our actions have to be affirmative. So that simply means we have to make sure that we are casting a wide net, that no one is left behind. So it's absolutely appropriate that the community might have goals to ensure that there is parity across all the community. It doesn't mean that you're tied hard and fast to any specific numbers, because of course quotas have been illegal for many decades. But is it appropriate to look at the disparate impact and the ease or equity of access in terms of goal setting? Absolutely. To look at that and to cast a wide net across all the community to make sure that everyone can benefit from the policies and decision making of every city's body.
Next up is Director Watling.
Thank you, Councilmember Hall. Just a quick add to your statement earlier about engagement. Very interesting exercise here, and looking at these, the case study and these questions. I think what it represents, as we would think about operationalizing engagement in this, it's not a single moment in time. These would need to be layers of engagement. To engage in point one feels a lot more like engaging with the community to help define and frame what appropriate might be, or other ways to really understand quality and scale from a community perspective. But that there would need to be another layer of engagement as decisions of site and other more details in an implementation like this. So it's not just engagement as a single moment. And quite frankly, some of the conversations we just had and some of the work we did in considering an equity board, again, represent that not a single engagement touch, but really layers of engagement is so critical when we operationalize this.
Absolutely. Good call out, Jeff. Thank you for that. And, community, much like a human population, is fluid. And even when you look at the what was shared earlier today about the composition of the city of Issaquah, both in the past, now, and in the future, it's in a constant state of shifting and changing, moving and growing. And so you have to be very deliberate and intentional to have these conversations, revisit these conversations, and always circle back to these conversations. And so there's lots of different touch points.
And this is Councilmember Hall. I'm not seeing anyone else in the chat indicating that they'd like to make a comment at this point.
Thank you. That's all that I had in terms of the practice of this case study. What I wanted to do or accomplish with this ultimately is to give you an example of what it looks like to come to two things. Number one, a process to design based on best practices to get to an end result or a deliverable with a step model. And then also, before you make a final decision, even embedded within that step model, how do you look at the process, deconstruct it, and break it down into its smaller parts, and engage a broader stakeholder community to think about the implication or impact of your decision making, to make sure that you have all of the information and voices centered around the table to make the best decisions for all of the community, and what it looks like to embed one of those processes within the other to come to really representative and equitable decision making, so that everyone that comes to the table in the city of Issaquah, whether they live, work, or recreate in the city, that we can make decisions for all of the community to move forward together. Slide. And so I wanted to stop again and make sure that, first of all, there's no other questions in terms of the information presented, concepts, or process. And then the end goal was, we wanted to make sure, Stephanie, Lauren, and I, that you were able to proactively inject equity into policies. We wanted to make sure that we were preventing continued harm to marginalized communities, and make sure that equity and diversity are values that we both champion, we lean into, and we use those as the lens through which we see the work that we do. Slide. So, were there any items missing? Are there any items that were helpful or not helpful? Do you have any questions, comments, or thoughts about today's exercise, about those two models, or how you might be able to proactively use either of those in your decision making or process development?
Thank you. It looks like we have some comments from Councilmember Walsh.
Thank you. This is Councilmember Walsh. So are we looking for discussion at this point or questions? Because I know we usually go to community, because my comments are all like my feedback and my thoughts and process, but I'm not sure if that's appropriate at this point.
I'll turn it over then back to Stephanie Johnson. So Stephanie, if you can open up your camera and mic.
Yeah, thank you for that. And thank you, Councilmember Walsh. I think that's really the discussion we're looking for here tonight amongst all of you. One thing I've heard is, where do we involve, those stakeholders, and how do we connect with the community? I know earlier in the agenda tonight, Deputy Council President Hunt, or excuse me, not Deputy Council President Hunt, read some feedback from a member of the public, I believe, an email receipt where, there was input to the public maybe in what we adopt. And so, we're looking to explore with you on how to build. And that's why we're here together as a team. We have certainly, had the training in both situations. We've now come back tonight to pilot something. And then we're kind of like, what's next? We thought that might be adopting one of these things or building a draft. Maybe it's having those conversations with some stakeholders, with our boards and commissions in the community. I think building a framework takes everybody in that process. And so I imagine, this conversation is going to morph in that way. Maybe our next step and what the council seeks is how we involve stakeholders or boards and commissions in that conversation. I'm looking to Shannon a little bit here too, because, this is an area that we've not built before. And she's had, expertise in other organizations in the best way to approach that. I know, we're looking for council input, but Shannon, maybe you could offer, how we approach that in the best way so that we do have those voices. I'm not going to remember your quote exactly, but nothing can be built for the people without the people. So
build nothing for them without them.
Yeah. So I don't know if that was a roundabout way of answering your question, but I think, if you do have a statement or, discussion item or a thought on how we potentially involve others next, looking for those comments for sure.
Yeah, and Stephanie, this is Councilmember Hall. I'll jump in now too, just to make sure that we're keeping with the agenda that we published out to the public. So I think for the first step, we'll take questions from the council. If you have any questions on what's come through, and then we'll open up for public comment. So if there's anyone on the line that would like to make comments on this before we go into our discussion. So Councilmember Walsh, I have you down as first for comments when we get there. So I had a quick question, but I see Council President Hunt does too, so I'll let her go first. Go ahead, Council President.
Okay, thank you. I had a question about whether, I got the impression from the packet that there was a decision to be made about whether we would want to go with the step model or something more like the step models that are shown, or the postcard. But then in the presentation, it seems that there's also a relationship between the two approaches. And so I wondered if there are examples, or if it would be useful to consider different fitting a postcard into different sorts of processes depending on who's using the framework, or if there are benefits of it being more uniform across different uses. And I ask this too because I think council is having the discussion right now at our study session, but there's also going to be boards and commissions, et cetera, that will be using this. And so I wonder if it's good to have it be uniform, or if it's maybe good to have some flexibility depending on the process.
I think it's probably a little bit of both. I think that the best practice is to have something that is uniform, that is something that fits a model, or at least a baseline standard, and then you can enhance it and add depending on situationally.
Okay, thank you.
And this is Councilmember Hall. That was actually going to be my exact question too, is are we really picking between a postcard and a step model, or is postcard one of the steps in a step model, or are you seeing cities kind of customize these checklists, or is it more consistent within a region?
What most people do in terms of best practice and what's benchmarked, and not just across the region, the cities that I work closely with, even as your neighbors. So that is you, that is Kirkland, that is Redmond, that is Bothell, that is Kenmore. All of them take both approaches, really. What they do is in building and designing to accomplish a deliverable, they go through a best practices step model, but embedded within those steps is to stop and be very intentional from step to step to make sure that they're asking and answering those questions that are part of that benchmark or the postcard model. So it's really a hybrid of both.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from council members? Or I guess anyone on the equity team? I'll wait just a minute and look at the chat and then we can move on to public comment if nothing else has come through.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm not seeing any burning questions at this time. That just meant you guys had a great presentation. No questions at all. So, so at this point, then I think we'll open for public comment. So I'll turn it over to Clerk Gieser and ask if there's anyone at this time who has indicated that they'd like to speak about this issue.
No one has signed up in advance, but if anyone on the call now is interested in making public comments on this item, you can raise your virtual hand by selecting the small hand icon. Usually you can locate that in the participant panel. And I'm just monitoring this list for a moment. And I don't see that anyone's indicating a desire to speak.
All right. Well, with that, then we will move on. And just a reminder to anyone watching out in the public, if you've ever liked to make any comments, you can do so via email on any of these as well. If you email citycouncil@issaquah.wa.gov, we read all your emails and we love to get them. So, all right. So moving on from public comment is council discussion. So we have these kinds of discussion questions that are here right in front of us. So opening the floor to other council members if anyone has any comments that they would like to get the ball rolling. And just a reminder too, we have about 15 minutes until we said we'd think about closing out our conversation. So I think it's okay for us to feel like we can start the conversation now and get the ball rolling and come back. But maybe Stephanie and Shannon step in too if you think maybe that is not the best path.
Oh no, I think it's good.
Okay. Oh right, I'm sorry, Councilmember Walsh. You're
Yay,
up first.
I get to go first. Okay, fantastic. So as I was reflecting on this, so there's 2 points of reflection, which is kind of the concept of the step model, which is really focused on process and kind of the path through things, and then the postcard model. And so from my perspective as a council member, the step model is really something that the administration needs to address. They need to be the ones that take the action on that and are engaging. I think Travis asked you to stop the presentation so that they can see the individuals commenting. There we go. Woo. So my thought process there would be, I like the step model, and I think the concepts around engagement and all of that are important, but I'm not sure there is as much for council or a board themselves to engage with on that concept. And thus, I think from my perspective and my use in going through the process of evaluating equity and the framework around it, the postcard model is more useful for what I'm going to use in evaluating policy questions and things like that. But even within the concept of the postcard model, I kind of saw two theories, two two focal areas, one of which is an internal type of thing, which is, what are your biases? Who are you not considering? Who have you talked to or not talked to? You know, and it's about your mindset and what you're bringing to the table. And then the other ones I thought of as more external, which I saw more in the Urban League and the Benita Horn question, which is kind of the who's touched by this, who's marginalized, what, it's the who, what, where, when, how types of questions when it comes to equity. So I'm not sure necessarily what to do with those two ideas. I think personally, when I'm coming into a conversation, I think maybe I should have addressed the what I'll call internal or bias questions myself. But the conversation in public, I think, is necessarily needs to address those more what I'm calling external conversations, or at least those things need to be not asked, but like there needs to be a checklist of those. Whereas I think the internal or bias questions, in some ways, they're important to certain conversations, otherwise are more internal. Anyway, I'm going off the rails because it's almost 10 o'clock at this point, but that's kind of where my mind is thinking when it comes to this, but I'm not sure how much of that is addressable or just kind of commentary that's in the air. Anyway.
Thank you. Don't worry, that was good commentary. And next up is Council President Hunt.
Thank you. I wanted to say thank you to everybody who's on the call now, including all of the equity team from the city. So thank you for participating in this conversation with us. And my comments are reflecting back on what Director Watling mentioned. I think that in terms of how to operationalize this, it probably will depend a lot on the group that is trying to use the framework, and then maybe also what kind of existing city process they're using the framework, they're applying the framework on. And so I think having that a little bit of flexibility there in the operationalizing of the framework will be useful. So it seems to me like it would be good to have some, as a next step, some examples of city processes, and then where we could incorporate the postcard step or steps from the postcard process in that existing city process. And I think that would be valuable because that gets us one step towards actually operationalizing an equity framework. And this has been a valuable exercise, so thank you.
And Councilmember DiMichele, you're up.
Thank you. Just very briefly, I agreed with the comments from Councilmember Walsh. When I first arrived in Issaquah, way back in the day, I worked for Superintendent Kateri Bro. She came into her job in the midst of a huge crisis in the school district. And her first thing that she did was got the staff and everybody to work on a mission statement and a strategic plan. And she said, if we can't put this up on everybody's refrigerator, it's never going to work. And so we produced a whole bunch of these little cards that were meant to go up on everybody's refrigerator. So she taught me the value of brevity and ease of use. And so the postcard approach is, to me, it's everything that I was hoping for out of this process, is something that we can hand out to everybody, that we all agree. And I think the thing that we're looking at to follow up with Councilmember Walsh is just, are we asking the right questions? I like the questions that are being asked. Perhaps a little bit more push on community engagement would be my only comment about the questions. But the questions themselves, as they are right now, are very good. And perhaps we can figure out a way or think about a way of just putting that focus on community engagement. But overall, I'm really pleased with this work. And I appreciate the process that we've gone through tonight, and thank everybody, and agree that it is very heartening to work for an organization that is working this diligently on equity and doing the work that's being done. So thanks to everybody. Thank you.
And this is Councilmember Hall again. I'm not seeing anyone else lining up in the chat, though. I'll provide just a few comments for myself right now too. With regard to the discussion slide, one of the questions is any items missing, question mark. I think that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I wonder if, even if we come up with our framework, we've got this postcard, we've trial tested it on a city policy that we have here in Issaquah. If the equity board comes into formation, this might be something they look at first to kind of get into that. Did the city council miss anything? Is there anything else worth looking into? And then just accepting that it can be updated as needed down the road. I think that kind of addresses that question there. And then I said this at one of our previous trainings too, but I love the idea of checklists. I read a book once called The Checklist Manifesto, and it was all about operating room mistakes and how just simple checklists in operating rooms and going through it and physically ticking it off and reading it out loud to everyone in the room actually helped operating room mistakes decrease dramatically. So I could see that really as a reflection here, like really helping us as a city in terms of just having that constant right there in front of us. Maybe it is on our fridge. Maybe it is. So those are kind of my initial comments. I know the 10 p.m. hour is approaching. So I did want to check in with, well, first and foremost, I want to see if Councilmember Martz, if you have anything you would like to add. Okay, and then City Administrator Bobkowitz, Stephanie, Channon, is this a good amount of feedback for right now? What are we looking for next steps? I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Hall, members of the council. We really appreciate the time that you spent tonight. We really just wanted to give you kind of a flavor of what this could be, and I think your input's been very valuable. I think what we would like to do now is take this back and sort through it and come back to you at a future study session in fairly short order with some more concrete plans to move forward. I think Councilmember Hall's final comments were really what's been going through my mind is that the equity board really needs to play a role in this as we move forward, but not to wait necessarily for them. So as we go into the budget process, this is a tool that I would like to have the council be able to use, even if it's a tool that evolves over time. So let us review the discussion this evening, come back to you with some more concrete recommendations on at least through the end of the year, and then once the equity board is in place, revisit these in 22 and beyond. And if I may, Councilmember Hall, just one last comment. I just want to thank the city's equity team. This is a group that's not new. It's a group that has been working for the last couple of years on issues of equity. And I think we certainly, as a staff, appreciate the council's direction and enthusiasm for this work. And I think tonight really is the first opportunity to really marry the work that staff has been doing with the work now the council's been doing. And I think together, we can help move Issaquah forward in the various roles that we have, because really it can't just be a staff thing. It can't just be an elected official thing. It has to be an everyone thing. And I certainly, as I have looked at communities around the country that have done this, it's not easy to find where you have both the elected officials and the staff working shoulder to shoulder. Many communities, it's one group or the other group that's taking a lead, not both working arm in arm. So thank you to the council, and thank you to the equity team. I think tonight really marks that joining of arms in our efforts, and we'll continue to move forward.
Well, great. Well, then that concludes our discussion tonight for ID 0927. The next thing on our agenda is good of the order. So if there's anyone on the line right now who would like to give a good of the order. All right. Well, with that, then the next item on agenda is adjournment. So we will adjourn this study session at 9:59 p.m. Thanks, everyone.